Chapter 225. Compared to the many strange methods of the wizards, the killing methods of the knights in this world were too primitive and crude. Even though the magic-breaking knights were of the same rank as the sorcerers and were not too far apart in terms of strength, looking at the battlefield, one would realize that other than the flame blade, cross-explosion slash, half-moon slash, and a few other combat techniques, they did not have any other means to restrain the sorcerers. On the other hand, the sorcerers had a dazzling array of strange sorcery and all sorts of unimaginable killing techniques. When combined, they could easily beat the magic-breaking knights half to death. The difference in strength between creatures of the same rank in a higher plane and a lower plane was simply astounding. Left with no choice, the 11 Radiant Knights could only split up and attack. Each of them killed a sorcerer and chased after them. This effectively prevented the sorcerers from hunting, but it also divided their strongest force. When all the Radiant Knights were lured away, the large number of hidden spell formations in the battlefield began to operate. As a result, on the ground, the corrosive acid swamps, the smoky poisonous wetlands, the blood-sucking forest where the vampiric vines spread freely, the quicksand traps with piles of mud and stone pillars. These terrifying places of death appeared one after another, almost occupying every part of the mountain forest. Many sorcerers and ghouls even made use of these special areas to engage in guerrilla warfare with the Demon Hunter Knights. Once the Demon Hunter Knights were lured into these areas, there was almost no one who could escape alive. A Radiant Knight had once entered the vampire forest in order to save a small team of more than 10 knights. But he encountered the most terrifying scene there. Countless vampiric vines that drilled out from the depths of the ground danced in the wind, curling up vines with a faint metallic luster as they attacked him from all directions. Moreover, each vine was covered with terrifying thorns, and one could even see the terrifying mouth of a lotus petal at the tip of the vine. Braving the danger of death, the Radiant Knight managed to escape in a sorry state. When he came out, there were still a few tentacles on his armor that had been chopped off. These tentacles were still twisting, and the sharp thorns scraped against the armor, making creaking sounds. As for the demonic cult beneath the Radiant Knight, it was drenched in the terrifying green juice. Green smoke rose from the corrosive acid, accompanied by a pungent stench. The leader of the knights, Windsoul, raised his head and looked at the distant battlefield. He saw with his own eyes that 7 to 8 demon hunters had accidentally entered the acid swamp while they were chasing a group of wizard beasts. Half of the members were careless and fell into it. Together with their demonic steeds, they were corroded into charred skeletons in the blink of an eye. The remaining members were pounced on by the ghouls, and the two sides began a bloody battle to the death. The forest was also filled with poisonous fog. When a squad of demon hunters barged into it, they could only vaguely hear angry roars and roars, as well as the roars of ferocious beasts, but they couldn't see anything inside. Naturally, the team of Demon Hunter Knights didn't appear in front of everyone again. The lands of absolute death were like death traps that devoured people without spitting out their bones. Any Demon Hunter Knight who barged in would not be able to escape unscathed. They had also divided the vast forest into many fragmented battlefields, making it difficult for the Demon Hunter Knights to gather into an army and launch a tide-like charge. "Sir, what do you think?" Windsoul turned his head to look at the great holy knight Willis, feeling sorry for them. "Get them to continue advancing. Make sure to avoid the dangerous areas of the enemy. No matter what, we must destroy the enemy's wizard tower. I will get the Dragon Knights to cooperate with you." Willis's majestic body stood tall on the green dragon Offrel's back as he answered without hesitation. "Then I will lead the troops from the front. Thank you for taking care of this place, sir." It had only been an hour of battle, but there were already 500 to 600 demon hunters who had fallen in this forest. Their sacrifices were only exchanged for 2 to 3 times the number of wizard beasts and ghouls. As for those evil wizards, they were like venomous snakes hiding in a dark cave. They could not find the best opportunity to attack, so they kept lying in wait. When you suddenly saw them, you would only see their disappearing silhouettes after killing them. Seeing this scene, Windsoul, who had been holding the line at the back, could not take it anymore. He led the 1,500 demon hunters to the battlefield. Behind them, the Holy Knight Willis raised his head and let out a strange, deep roar. Amidst the roar, the 3 green dragons that were hiding in the forest at the back soared into the sky. They carried the dragon knights on their backs and spread their wide, membranous wings. They quickly flew through the forest and pounced on the witchcraft traps on the battlefield. Every time they flew past those areas, they would open their mouths and spit out a thick dragon's breath. The thick green, poisonous dragon's breath sank into the acid swamp and the poisonous fog, plowing through everything inside. Countless magi beasts ran out from inside, their bodies wrapped in wisps of green, poisonous mist. Before they could run far, the terrifying poison took their lives. One by one, the wizard beasts fell silently into the forest, their bodies quickly rotting and disintegrating. The scene was unbearable to watch. Ghouls were undead creatures and were immune to poison-type attacks. They nimbly climbed to the top of the trees and continuously jumped from the branches, attempting to climb onto the green dragons that were flying through the sky and drag them down. Unfortunately, they rarely succeeded. Most of them were blown away by the strong wind brought by the green dragons. Even if there were some who succeeded, they would be sliced into 2 by the dragon knights on the green dragons' backs. The green dragons continuously dove, dragon's breath, pulled up, dove again, dragon's breath again, pulled up again. After 2 to 3 rounds of this, the wizard formation hidden in the land of death was finally destroyed. Some of the witchcraft traps started losing their effectiveness, and the forest returned to normal. But the white bones and charred remains left in the empty space in the forest clearly showed the terrifying scene that had happened here. Inside the War Wizard's Pagoda, more than a dozen wizards were busily working, but they were not panicking. Each of them was commanding a large group of mechanical beasts, working hard to complete the last part of the construction of the Wizard's Pagoda. The Battle of the Front Lines was already in full swing. The wizard beasts that the wizard camp had painstakingly accumulated over the past half a month had all been used up. While the elite ghouls were powerful, they did not have enough numbers and could not hold up on such a large battlefield. Left with no choice, the wizards at the front lines could only use the wizard formation that they had set up beforehand to barely stop the enemy's advance. But with the giant dragon team's relentless dragon's breath, these wizard formations were starting to get damaged. The situation on the battlefield was getting worse by the day. The battlefield had already spread from 5 miles away from the wizard camp to 2 miles away. A few demon hunters had already barged into the area of the camp. Even though they were also killed by the guards of the camp, this showed that time was of the essence. An hour, or half an hour. If they could not complete the construction of the Wizard's Pagoda before the large group of demon hunters swarmed into the camp, then the fragile Wizard's Pagoda would not be able to withstand the attack of the giant dragons. Therefore, when the alarm from the front line rang out one after another, all the wizards from the family put in 120% of their energy and worked hard. In a secret room within the pagoda, a male and female level 3 wizards were standing in front of Wizard Salubo's projection, discussing softly. "Sir Salubo, let's go out and hold them off. As long as we devour 1 or 2 giant dragons, we should be able to slow down their advance. That way, we could buy a little more time for the Wizard's Pagoda." The one speaking was a female wizard in a green robe. Her face was hidden in a layer of green fog, making it impossible to see her face clearly. But when she said the word devour, the greed and urgency in her tone was evident. Even though the wizard in a purple robe, standing on the other side, did not hide himself, the eerie purple eyes that covered his entire body were exceptionally frightening. On his exposed neck, face, and hands, there were countless, slightly blinking purple eyes. These eyes were obviously not some kind of decoration, but something that actually existed. When they opened at the same time, rolling their eyeballs and peering in all directions, anyone would feel their hairs stand on end, and their hearts would involuntarily feel a sense of reverence. "That's right, Sir Salubo. Let Sana and I go out and fight for a while. It shouldn't be a problem to exterminate those green dragons." It was rare for the purple-eyed wizard to speak up in agreement with his companion. No, both of you focus too much on physical strength, and your analysis of the laws of the mutated dimension has yet to be completed. Under the restrictions of the laws of the dimension, how much power can you use? The projection finally opened its eyes and asked coldly. The purple-eyed wizard furrowed his brows and answered uncertainly, "About 45%. The other wizard in a purple robe also forced a smile. "I can only use 35% of my power." "Oomph," the projection said disdainfully. "This bit of power will only allow you to reach the peak of level 2. It might not be a problem to deal with a few small dragons, but if you reveal your strength, that level 4 Holy Knight will have to go all out." "Sir, they're already here. Why aren't they going all out? What is that Willis waiting for?" The purple-eyed wizard asked, puzzled. He. Do you think he doesn't want to fight? I'm the one who's shocking him. Ever since he stepped into the forest, I've split a shred of my mental will to suppress his mind. This will make him feel an inexplicable sense of fear, but he can't find a reason. It's precisely because of this that he's become so conservative and passive. Otherwise, if he brought the giant dragon straight to the War Wizard's pagoda at the start of the battle, do you think the two of you would be able to block his attacks? The two level 3 wizards looked at each other, the respect in their hearts even more intense. To be able to plant a seed of will in the mind of a level 4-dimensional expert without letting the other party notice and indirectly influence the other party's important decisions. This kind of ability was simply too unimaginable. Chapter 226. The flames of war in the forest were getting closer and closer. A few areas had already been breached. Atop their demonic colts, the demon hunter knights wielding their dazzling longswords appeared at the edge of the wizard camp, engaging in a life-and-death battle with the wizard beasts, mechanical beasts, and ghouls that were guarding the area. If not for the large number of wizard traps set up around the camp, the hordes of demon hunter knights might have already swarmed into the camp and started attacking the War Wizard's pagoda. But even so, as the flames of war gradually reached the base of the wizard's pagoda, the space left for the wizards to move about became smaller and smaller. Gradually, the last batch of resistance gathered in front of the main entrance of the wizard's pagoda. The 13 wizards who had sworn to defend the area with their lives were guarding it, not retreating an inch. On this flat battlefield that was less than 500 meters wide, there were up to 300 summoned beasts and puppet beasts of various types. As for the lower-level wizard beasts and mechanical beasts, they had all been slaughtered by the demon hunter knights, and the forest around the wizard's pagoda had suffered even more destructive attacks. There was a continuous sea of fire and ferocious natural storms everywhere. The ferocious flames could not be extinguished once they were ignited. In the blink of an eye, the forest within a 10-mile radius was engulfed in a sea of fire. Teams of demon hunter knights swarmed out of the forest and began to gather around the perimeter of the camp. Their faces and bodies still had traces of being licked by the intense flames, and their armor still had fine scratches left by wind daggers. Even though they had paid a heavy price to pass through this terrifying area, they still advanced with the hope of victory and their hatred for the wizards, finally arriving at the base of the terrifying wizard's pagoda. The demon hunter knights gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, reorganizing their troops. 9 radiant knights led the charge, leading the less than 4,000 demon hunter knights toward the last line of defense of the wizards, turning back to look at the path they had come from. In this forest, in a narrow area less than 5 miles wide, the army of knights had sacrificed the lives of 2 radiant knights, 33 spellbreaker knights, and over 2,000 demon hunter knights. Such a heavy price was simply beyond everyone's imagination. The rugged mountainous forest had become a burial ground. Mutilated corpses of knights and broken demonic colts could be seen everywhere. Now, as the mountain fire spread, everything was devoured by the raging flames. Truth be told, if it weren't for the Green Dragon Squad and the Dragon Knights swooping down from the sky and destroying half of the sorcerer's setup, the Demon Hunter Knights would have suffered even more casualties. Compared to the sacrifices of the knights, in this forest, there were also two magi who had crossed planes and fallen forever. This meant that the number of magi the Salubo family had sent to the Knight's Plane had reached 7. This was getting closer and closer to the psychological bottom line of the upper echelons of the family. If they lost more than 9 magi, even if the family took over the plane, they wouldn't be able to develop it quickly. After all, the foundation of the sorcerer world needed sorcerers, and the 2 secondary planes also needed sorcerers. In the short term, drawing out the main forces of a plane to engage in a planar war would not have too much of an impact on the local situation. However, if the main forces of the family were pinned down in a certain area for a long period of time, or if they lost too much of their strength, the ruling structure of the entire family would become unstable. If they succeeded in invading the Knight's Plane, the Salubo family might be able to get rich returns every year, but they needed a lot of power to maintain their rule. It was the same for the other 2 secondary planes. If the main forces of the family left for too long, and the natives there heard the news and started a new wave of resistance, it would not be worth it. Hence, when the 2 magi died in battle under the sneak attack of the Dragon Knights, the upper echelons of the family finally decided to retreat and defend the Wizard's Pagoda. At this moment, the construction of the Wizard's Pagoda had pinned down 11 magi, and there were only 13 magi left to defend the Wizard's Pagoda, including the Level 2 Wizard Forgan. At the front of the team was a group of magi with powerful bodies, with 3 body-tempering wizards as the main force, and a large group of summon creatures to support them. Grim and Wizard Hyde, as they also had decent bodies after their transformation, were spread out on both sides to support the defense. Most of the magi stayed within the protective circle, continuously throwing powerful spells with large area of effect into the dense forest of knights. Most of the magi who were not adept in combat also took on a special wizard profession, either throwing out large amounts of potions to summon creatures with strange abilities or pulling out bags of wizard scrolls, crazily throwing them at the heads of the knights. 2 magi who were adept in curse spells started casting spells in a frenzy, throwing colorful curse halos at the area where the knights were most concentrated. When the demon hunters of the front line were only 30 meters away from the sorcerer, their bodies were shrouded by colorful and disgusting curses. Not only did they feel dizzy and weak, but they also felt as if they were covered in a thick layer of mud. Their movements became abnormally slow. Even the most violent charge of the knights was reduced to a comical slow motion. All kinds of terrifying magical plants sprouted from the ground, curling around, piercing, or sucking blood. It was a huge problem for the Demon Hunter Knights who were struggling to advance. The Demon Hunter Knights at the back were blocked, so they could only put away their swords and switch to their rune bows. Flame and frost arrows rained down on the area defended by the Magi. Normally, such attacks with weak elemental damage would not have posed any threat to the Magi. However, the Magi were outnumbered, and the Magi were severely weakened. Hence, the 3 anatomy refinery sorcerers expanded their bodies into terrifying giants, leaping forward and smashing every demon hunter knight that entered their line of sight into minced meat. At the same time, they put up a protective barrier to block the Magi's unconventional long-range attacks. The anatomy refinery sorcerers were powerful, and they might be able to withstand such a dense and continuous attack, but the blood giants, creeping monsters, rock golems, evil eyes, and other summoned creatures that were clustered around them couldn't withstand it. One by one, they fell to the ground with their bodies pierced by arrows and disappeared. Soon, the courageous demon hunters weaved their way through the witchcraft traps with their bodies of flesh and blood, barging into the defensive circle of the sorcerers and engaging them in close combat. The 3 anatomy refinery sorcerers defended the front, while Grim was assigned to the left. Here, he alone had to defend a line of defense that was nearly 70 meters wide. His Magi Legion had been completely destroyed in the Forest of Death. Now, the only ones that could stand in front of him were the Flame Lord, the Lightning Giant, and the 2 quasi-sorcerers. Once upon a time, the Lightning Giant was Grim's main Magi. However, as he became a Magi, These quasi-sorcerers could no longer keep up with him. Even if they occasionally appeared on the battlefield, they had already become expendable. However, no matter how difficult the situation was, he was still in a much better situation than Wizard Hyde on the other side. No matter what, Grimm still had 4 subordinates to share the pressure, while Wizard Hyde had to defend such a wide battlefield all by himself. If he did not have a mechanical body, as long as his mental strength was not depleted, he would have endless physical strength. If it were any other magi, they would have died of exhaustion just running back and forth to kill the magi. In the Forest of Death, if they encountered an opponent that they could not defeat, they could still run, fly, or directly change the battlefield. But here, even if there was a small team of magic-breaking knights, they could only grit their teeth and defend their position with their lives. As for reinforcements, as long as there were no Knights of Light, the rank 2 Wizard Forgan would never make a move. Therefore, Grimm had the chance to admire Wizard Hyde's heroic appearance. Based on the nature of a wizard, Hyde must have hidden some of his strength. However, when a team of 5 magic-breaking knights was right in front of him, it would be very difficult for him to hide his strength, unless he was tired of living. In the next second, Wizard Hyde turned into a giant octopus with more than 10 thick metal tentacles. Apart from his head and a small part of his body that was still in the center, the rest of his body parts quickly assembled into horrifying metal-pointed tentacles, which swept towards the few magic-breaking knights like a storm. It was no wonder that the Thunderbird respectfully addressed him as Boss Hyde. Sure enough, he possessed terrifying power far beyond that of ordinary people in close combat. Under Grimm's shocked gaze, this Boss Hyde cut the 5 attacking magic-breaking knights into pieces. And the price he paid was merely a light injury. Of the 12 metal tentacles, 3 were cut off, and 2 had different degrees of damage. When Wizard Hyde returned to his human form from his octopus form, a large portion of his body was damaged. The countless rapidly rotating gears and bearings in his body also let out creaking noises, as if even their operation had become less efficient. At this moment, Grimm's good luck finally came to an end. A radiant knight, 2 magic-breaking knights, and nearly 100 demon hunters appeared in front of him, screaming as they rushed towards him. At this moment, the rank 2 Wizard Forgan was fighting with the 2 Knights of Radiance right in front of the formation. Even the 3 body refinement wizards had silently retreated from that area. Since the battlefield was small, Grimm could not create a wide enough lava pool with his flame demon form, and his magic puppets were not enough to defend against such a powerful team. Chapter 227. With Grimm's current strength, after transforming into his Balrog form, his various attributes would multiply, and his strength would soar by a large margin. But everything had its pros and cons. It was extremely difficult to control the huge Balrog form, which caused Grimm's movement speed and attack frequency to be greatly reduced. Even though his attacks were powerful, his speed was much slower. If he encountered an agile opponent like Mary, it would be difficult for his attacks to hit the enemy. However, the combat style of a Balrog was more inclined to defend and counterattack, so the requirement for speed was not that strict. Long-range Balrogs relied on violent fire spells to bombard the enemy, while mid-range Balrogs relied on fire whips and insta-fire spells. If an enemy managed to get to his side, he would be able to deal massive damage to the enemy by relying on the lava pool and flame barrier. Unless the enemy was immune to fire, they could only endure the terrifying fire damage while engaging in close combat with Grimm's Balrog form. That was why Grimm did not try to dodge the swarm of enemies. Instead, he roared and prepared for battle. As a Balrog, he had already transformed the area he was in into a world of black and red lava that spewed scorching flames everywhere. He stood in the boiling lava, bent down, and lifted up a huge piece of lava that was 5 meters tall, 4 meters wide, and 1 meter thick, and erected it to cover his body. With it, Grimm successfully withstood the frost bolts of over 100 demon hunter knights. Behind Grimm, 2 aqua harpies unleashed a large-scale blizzard in the path of the demon hunters. Violent ice blades and snow swords were wrapped in the howling cold wind, and every demon hunter who barged into the blizzard was covered in a layer of ice crystals. Some of the demon hunters with weaker resistance were even frozen on the spot and could only raise their energy shields to defend against the ice blades. However, most of the demon hunters successfully passed through the blizzard and arrived in front of the boiling magma pool with raging flames. The leader of the Radiant Knights was a muscular middle-aged man with short, dark brown hair. His eyes were like lightning, his nose was straight, and his mouth was wide. At first glance, one could tell that he was a tough person. With a roar, his demonic colt stood on its hind legs, and two energy blades slashed at Grimm's lava shield from a distance of 20 meters. Rubble flew and lava splashed. Two deep cross-shaped sword marks appeared on the surface of the shield. Grimm revealed half of his face from behind the shield. With a sinister smile, a lava fireball the size of a wash basin whistled towards his opponent. Unfortunately, the magma fireball was cut into 4 halves by the energy blades of the two magic-breaking knights when it was only halfway through its flight. It exploded in the air and splashed a rain of magma. Just as the knights hurriedly rode their horses to avoid the attack, the lightning giant that had been hiding in the air suddenly revealed itself. Along with its appearance were the raging waves of thunder and lightning that came crashing down. Just as the demon hunters hurriedly rode their horses to avoid the attack, the lightning giant that had been hiding in the air suddenly revealed itself. Along with its appearance came the raging waves of thunder and lightning. At the same time, the flame lord that was standing silently behind Grimm also completed its final spell. As it raised its hands, a crimson flame storm that covered an area of 100 meters exploded in the middle of the group of demon hunters. In Grimm's mind, the AI chip projected the data. The highest degree of energy in the core area of the crimson flame storm was 117 degrees. Based on Grimm's understanding, the knights in this realm generally lacked resistance equipment. Even the Radiant Knights' rune equipment could not withstand up to 100 degrees of energy damage, and the magic-breaking knights could only withstand up to 40 degrees of energy damage. As for the regular demon hunters, they could only withstand around 15 degrees of energy damage. This level of equipment was more than enough to deal with the naturally awakened evildoers in the realm. However, it was too weak against the evil sorcerers that had come from another realm. Under the double attack of the crimson flame storm and the raging waves of thunder and lightning, countless demon hunters struggled in pain, trying their best to escape the area ravaged by the spells. Their hair, skin, and armor had already melted together under the terrifying heat. If they did not escape from the crimson flame field within 3 breaths of time, their entire bodies would collapse into a ball like a candle, a ball of ash that no one would be able to distinguish from its original appearance. Seeing the chaotic and cruel battlefield around him, the middle-aged Radiant Knight roared in anger. He leapt off his magic colt and ran towards Grimm with large strides. His steel boots stepped into the lava, and he was quickly scalded red. Intense energy and intense fire elements clashed, causing dazzling sparks to fly. "You're finally here." Grimm had been hiding behind the lava shield, and the AI chip in his mind was operating at a high efficiency. It had gathered a large amount of information and integrated it into the battlefield's dynamic monitoring system, continuously providing him with the best response. Lord Forgan was entangled with the enemy, and Grimm had to face a Grade 2 demon hunter from another world. In terms of life force, he had no chance of fighting the enemy head-on. It was impossible for him to escape without a fight. Once he abandoned his position, he would not have many options left, and he would have to face the wrath of the higher-ups of the Magi world. Although it was more dangerous to go all out against this Radiant Knight, even if he failed and suffered heavy injuries, he would still have the chance to legitimately withdraw from the battlefield. Furthermore, with the help of the AI chip and the abilities of the magic puppets, it was not impossible for him to injure or even kill this Radiant Knight. Defeating him was something he could not do with his current abilities. However, the AI chip success rate was as high as 17%. But the price, Grimm clenched his teeth as he looked at the Radiant Knight who was stepping on the magma. He finally made up his mind. Kill. The distance of 20 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Taking advantage of the moment the strong, radiant knight arrived in front of him, Grim raised his huge lava shield with all his might. The lava shield, with viscous red lava flowing on it, flew out with a whoosh, fiercely smashing towards the enemy. Before the shield even reached him, a scorching heat wave was already pressing down on him. The sound of metal clanging could be heard. The runic longsword that was soaked in radiant energy slashed down with great force. The 1-meter-thick lava shield finally could not withstand the double attack of the Radiant Knight's powerful strength and runic energy. It was split in two from the middle and flew past the Radiant Knight's body. Having cleared the obstacle between the two, the Radiant Knight leapt into the air, the runic sword that was surrounded by radiance drawing a terrifying cross in the air, fiercely slashing towards Grim. Although Grim's Balrog form had thick skin and flesh, and he also had lava armor and witchcraft defense, his defense was not much stronger than the lava shield. If the Radiant Knight's attack landed, the Balrog's entire body would probably be pierced through. The Balrog, whose entire body was made of black-red lava and terrifying flames, staggered a step back. Then, it stretched out its huge fan-like lava hand and clashed with the long sword of the Radiant Knight. Roar. Grim let out a mournful howl. His huge hand had been pierced through by the sword, all the way to the hilt. The Radiant Knight's sword was filled with berserk runic energy, and Grim's entire right arm was shredded into a rain of fire by the sword rays that filled the sky. This was the moment. Enduring the excruciating pain in his body, Grim's mind vibrated rapidly. As he staggered backwards, the Lord of the Flames behind him finally released a spell that he had prepared for a long time. Flame Cage. As the spell was completed, the lava that Grim had painstakingly created quickly gathered under the Radiant Knight's feet and rose from the ground. It twisted and extended into the shape of a cage, trapping the Radiant Knight inside. The middle-aged Radiant Knight raised his head and looked at the cage in front of him. The entire cage was glowing red, and flames flowed around it. Thick pillars of lava propped up the four walls, and the blazing lava flowed slowly between the pillars. The gap left behind was not enough for him to rush out. The Radiant Knight raised his sword, and a berserk storm of blades instantly engulfed the flame cage. The lava pillars that were 1/2 meter in diameter could not withstand such a strong energy attack, and were instantly destroyed. Unfortunately, before the Radiant Knight could escape, the lava in the pool swirled up and once again repaired the flame cage. Taking advantage of this time, the lightning giant in the sky appeared in the cage in a flash. Before the Radiant Knight could swing his sword to attack, a blinding elemental storm engulfed the cage. The lightning giant had actually self-destructed. The ferocious waves of lightning washed over everything inside, causing the flame cage to suffer. If not for the Lord of the Flames maintaining it with all his might, it would have already collapsed. The Radiant Knight's expression changed greatly, and he frantically extracted the powerful energy from the runic equipment to replenish his body, doing his best to resist the invasion of the lightning explosion. 13 fingers might have passed in the blink of an eye under normal circumstances, but at this moment, it was so painful and torturous. With great difficulty, the waves of elemental sacrificial explosion gradually subsided. The Radiant Knight was about to gather his strength to break this damn cage when another elemental puppet appeared in the flame cage. Waterman. In the next second, the bone-chilling power of ice began to wreak havoc in the cage, turning it into a world of ice and snow. After 11 fingers, another Waterman rushed into the cage and self-destructed. After experiencing 3 consecutive self-destructions of the elemental puppets, the Radiant Knight spat out blood as he struggled to break out of the lava pillars. However, just as he steadied himself, he raised his head and saw a terrifying, dazzling red light coming down from above, completely covering him. Chapter 228. A sun gradually lit up between Grim's palms. This was not a spell that Grim had used before. nor was it a magic artifact. It was the purest form of light and heat. When Grimm abandoned all external forms of witchcraft and condensed all of his fire origin force, a form of blazing light appeared through the power of laws. It didn't have the double damage of a magma fireball that combined physical damage and lava sputtering, nor did it have the terrifying shockwaves of a fireball, nor did it have the frightening killing range of a crimson flame storm. But when all of these were discarded, all that was left was the extremely condensed light and heat. It was just a beam of light. Its attack range was not wide, and it was condensed between Grimm's palms. It was only as thick as an egg, and it looked more like a thick beam of heat. But when it hit the middle-aged Radiant Knight's chest and abdomen, a large hole was instantly melted into the exquisite golden armor. The flesh and blood under the armor withered and vaporized as soon as it came into contact with the light. The Radiant Knight did not even have the chance to dodge or defend, and a hole was burned through his abdomen. The flesh, tendons, and bones at the edge of the wound were all scorched, but the blood vessels were blocked. This was why there was not much blood in such a terrifying wound. But that was not all. The extremely high heat that came with the beam quickly spread the terrifying energy into the Radiant Knight's body. The middle-aged Radiant Knight felt as if he had swallowed a sun, and his whole body was emitting extreme light and heat. The light and heat boiled his blood and burned his body. Excess energy was released from the pores all over his body. At this moment, he felt like he was about to be cooked. The Radiant Knight's face was pale, and large drops of sweat rolled down his forehead and cheeks. But before they could fall, they were roasted into steam by his scalding skin and disappeared without a trace. He roared loudly, and a surge of rune energy rushed out from the tip of his sword, condensing into a shield made of pure energy in front of him, which temporarily blocked the terrifying light beam from reaching him. However, as the light and heat converged on the barrier, a small dent began to appear, and it was gradually expanding. The Radiant Knight clutched the hole in his stomach with one hand, while his other hand tried to activate the rune energy. He staggered backward, as if trying to escape the attack range of the light beam. Grimm struggled to adjust the position of the beam in his hand, trying his best to make the target the focus of the beam. Unfortunately, this kind of attack was only an application of the law of fire that he had recently come up with. He was not proficient in using it, and it was quite difficult to control. Therefore, the attack range was only a pitiful 20 meters. Against those fast-moving targets, it was difficult for the light of blazing flames to maintain a locked state. The two magic-breaking knights charged forward on their magic colts, trying to block the terrifying beam of light with their bodies. However, they were intercepted by the Flame Lord. The battle between the three people instantly fell into a terrifying moment of life and death. Seeing that the enemy was about to escape his attack range, Grimm could only wave his hand to disperse the flames. It had only been 7 seconds, but Grimm's lava hands were already as black as charcoal. Even with Grimm's flaming body, the terrifying temperature was difficult to endure. His right hand had just been repaired, and it seemed that he would need to find another chance to repair it. Grimm watched the Radiant Knight stagger backward, and a cold smile appeared on his terrifying face made of flames. The secret voodoo scroll hanging from his waist silently flew into his hand, and he started flipping through it quickly. Since the start of the battle, he had not used any of the 6 instant cast spells stored in the secret voodoo scroll. Was it not for the sake of using them at the most critical moment? Now that the head of a Radiant Knight was in front of him, could there be a more critical moment than this? Without any explanation, the flipping pages of the secret voodoo poison scroll automatically stopped at a certain page. Immediately after, a brilliant ring of fire burst out of the page. Fire Core Explosion. This single target fire spell could be said to be the most powerful spell that Grimm had mastered. The terrifying fire element that had been compressed to the extreme suddenly exploded at a certain spatial node, forming a collapsing energy annihilation zone. All creatures that were sucked into it would suffer devastating fire damage. Preliminary estimates showed that the fire element in the core area could reach a shocking 115 degrees. However, because the attack range was only a small 1 meter, it was classified as a single-target spell. Under the obstruction of the energy barrier, the fire core explosion did not explode on the Radiant Knight's body, but slightly ahead. Even so, this sudden burst of terrifying spell successfully annihilated the energy barrier activated by the Radiant Knight, and the rune sword in his right arm were sucked into it. The Radiant Knight screamed in pain. The sword that was covered in special runes emitted black smoke, and some of the runes on the blade were also destroyed by the powerful attack. The Radiant Knight's entire palm was a bloody mess, revealing the dark red tendons and white hand bones. Asterisk whoosh whoosh whoosh. Asterisk the pages continue to turn. Another ring of light surged on the secret voodoo scroll. Bursting flames. This was an area of effect spell similar to the Crimson Flamestorm. However, the area covered by the Crimson Flamestorm was too large, and the degree of fire damage was only about 30 degrees. It was only suitable for clearing large areas and was not very useful against strong enemies. Bursting Flames was much more condensed than the Crimson Flamestorm. Its attack range was only 5 meters, but the degree of fire damage reached 70 degrees. This was already an attack that could cause substantial damage to most enemies. Without the obstruction of the energy barrier, the bursting flames successfully enveloped the Radiant Knight. A strange rune formation appeared under the Radiant Knight's feet, and violent fire energy instantly engulfed his body. The second spell had just been activated, and Grim did not even have the time to check the effects of the attack. His consciousness moved slightly, and the secret voodoo scroll in his hand continued to flip. Volcano of Doomsday. Molten fire core explosion. Meteor shower. In one breath, Grim activated all 5 instant cast spells in the secret voodoo scroll. As the strongest spell he had stored 2 molten fire core explosion spells in advance. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed to store different types of spells in the future, Grim would definitely have stored 6 molten fire core explosion spells. But even so, the 5 powerful spells were cast in one go, giving the Radiant Knight a terrifying nightmare. At this moment, it was as if 5 powerful fire elemental magi were surrounding him and attacking him, and they were the most cruel kind. The intense fire elemental energy was concentrated in a small area, and the balance of the elemental energy there was severely damaged. The terrifyingly high temperature and terrifying elemental flames made people feel as though they were in the fire elemental plane. Even a metal mountain would be melted into molten iron under the devastating fire elemental spells, let alone a Radiant Knight with a body of flesh and blood. A rank 1 Magus challenging and killing a rank 2 creature was something that would never happen in the Magus world. The harsh laws of the plane and the huge disparity in strength made it impossible for anyone to make up for the difference in ranks with their casting techniques and superior battle tactics. This also reflected the strictness of the Sorcerer Plane's hierarchy from another perspective. But in the planar battlefield, this situation wasn't so absolute. As the raging elemental flames slowly dissipated, a person who had been ravaged by the spells fell out. As the flesh on his body had almost all withered and carbonized, the melted armor poured over his bones, making him look like a golden skeleton from afar. The terrifyingly high temperature caused his remaining skeleton to emit thick white smoke. It seemed that even the last remaining part of his skeleton could turn into ashes and scatter. The rune sword, the knight's armor, the strong body, the short brown hair. These characteristics that originally belonged to the Radiant Knight had disappeared, leaving behind a terrifying skeleton that was difficult to distinguish. Grim staggered and retreated from his Balrog transformation. The 7 seconds of blazing light had consumed the purest fire elemental energy in his body. This was not something that could be quickly recovered by swallowing a few bottles of potions. He could only accumulate it bit by bit with the help of the law of meditation day after day. As for the 5 consecutive fire spells, it only consumed the spell reserves in the secret voodoo scroll. It did not consume his power of the will. Otherwise, he could only watch his enemy escape in front of him. However, the severe consumption of his power of the will made it hard for Grimm to continue. He could only grab the golden skeleton with one hand and the secret voodoo scroll with the other as he staggered back. Evil bug, go take over the position of the fire demon. Wizard Forgan's voice emerged from afar. It seemed like even though Wizard Forgan could not escape from the two Radiant Knights, he was still paying close attention to the situation of the battlefield behind him. With this Grade 2 Radiant Knight as a spoil of war, no one dared to object to Grimm's decision to run away. After all, put yourself in Grimm's shoes. How many of the rank 1 wizards had the power to kill a Radiant Knight? If it was any other wizard, they would have been beaten to a pulp by that Radiant Knight. There was no way they could turn the situation around. Chapter 229. Slay a Grade 2 Radiant Knight. If they had never come into contact with the Radiant Knights before, perhaps some magi would dare to dream of such a thing. However, after experiencing several battles with the Radiant Knights, all Grade 1 magi had long since given up on such unrealistic fantasies. Although the Knights of the Plane of Knights were slightly weaker, when they swung their glowing runic swords, even the most basic physical attack could be converted to a magic effect of 60 degrees. As for the Knight's Berserk battle technique, it could reach an astonishing 120 degrees. This also meant that once these Knights got close, ordinary defensive spells and elemental barriers would not be able to withstand their attacks at all. Hence, the most common tactic used by these Knights against spellcasters was to raise their energy shields and charge forward while enduring the opponent's spells. Then, they would rush to the side of the spellcaster and cut them into pieces. Then, the world would be at peace. Simple, violent, and direct. It sounded so crude that people could not help but laugh. However, these Knights had relied on this method to slaughter all the naturally awakened spellcasters of this plane. That was until they encountered these evil magi from the sorcerer world. Grimm dragged the golden skeleton of the knight and retreated from the battlefield, while Entik led a swarm of carrion beetles to replace him. Both sides inevitably brushed past each other. Entik's face was hidden under the shadow of his hood, and only part of his disgusting mouth could be seen. The moment they brushed past each other, he quietly tilted his head and glanced at Grimm. In his unique insect voice, he said, "You're very powerful." Then, he secretly glanced at the secret voodoo scroll in Grimm's left hand before commanding the carrion beetles to charge into the battlefield. Only when Entik's sticky gaze left him did the disgusting feeling in Grimm's heart gradually begin to subside. "You're very powerful." Entik's bloodthirsty gaze, the hoarse and unpleasant insect cries, and the meaningful hints made Grimm feel extremely uncomfortable. If not for the Lord of the Flames waiting not far behind him, as well as the powerful self-defense spell left in the secret voodoo scroll in his hand, Grimm suspected that Entik would not be able to suppress the malice in his heart and launch an attack on him. Although Grimm was already very weak, he still retained some strength to counterattack. Once someone couldn't restrain their greed, he guaranteed that he would use the most violent counterattack to shatter their unrealistic fantasies. Sorcerers were like lonely and greedy wolves that could usually gather together to devour their enemies. But once someone in their group showed signs of fatigue or became weak, they wouldn't mind using the cruel law of the wolf pack to clean up the weak. This cruel competitive relationship made it difficult for wizards to work together wholeheartedly, but it also nurtured many evil, cruel, and terrifying powerhouses who could stand alone and deal with any unfavorable situation. In the complicated and ever-changing situation of the planar battlefield, there wasn't much meaning in working together. On the contrary, it was the all-round magi who had a higher chance of survival. It was no wonder that non-combat magi were so eager to be dragged onto the battlefield and sent to their deaths at the mention of the planar war. After all, in the planar battlefield, there would be no anatomy refinery sorcerers to block the surging enemies for you, nor would there be elemental sorcerers to prop up an elemental shield for you, nor would there be sorcerers to drag you along as you fled. When you were in the planar battlefield, you would always be fighting alone. In the planar battlefield, you had to solve all the problems you faced. Once you fell into a crisis because of your own incompetence, don't expect your companions to come to your rescue without hesitation. All they could do was throw a witchcraft fireball at you and drag your enemies to the grave with you. Just like in the wild battle earlier, although the three anatomy refinery sorcerers, Grimm, and Hyde had put up a simple defense line on the outside, there were still a lot of small fries that slipped through the defense line. The Magi, who were protected in the inner circle, tried their best to clean up the large group of demon hunter knights in the distance, while dealing with the annoying ones that rushed to their sides. In such a situation, the auxiliary sorcerers, who had no ability to protect themselves and relied on the protection of their companions to unleash their maximum combat power, were the quickest to die. Perhaps this was the main reason why most arcane sorcerers would work hard to learn some elemental sorcery. While the outer circle of the battlefield was bloody and tragic, the inner circle of the battlefield was also very lively. Before Grimm could drag his exhausted body back to the group of sorcerers, a squad of demon hunter knights charged at him while chanting the inane slogan of "Exterminate Evil." Of course, they quickly fell under the violent fire spells of the Lord of the Flames. It had to be said that Grimm had the confidence of having a wizard-level magic puppet by his side to protect him. It took Grimm the time it took to brew a cup of tea to finish the short distance of less than 100 meters. Behind him, more than 30 demon hunter knights had already fallen. As Grimm slowly walked through the sorcerer's formation, the sorcerers who were fighting with all their might could not help but nod at him. They were not stingy with showing their respect to a companion who could kill a grade 2 Radiant Knight all by himself. After greeting Wizard Kogan and nodding at the others, Grimm slowly retreated into the gate of the Wizard's Pagoda. He found a safe place to treat his injuries. He took out a leaf of life and put it in his mouth, then took out a bottle of ointment and applied it to his severely burned hands. He then raised his head and swallowed a bottle of potion that stimulated his mental strength. Only then did he sit down with difficulty, clenching his teeth as he endured the intense pain in his limbs. At this moment, the self-examination report projected by the AI chip in the depths of his eyes revealed the true state of his body. Grimm, human, semi-elemental, male, grade 1 elemental sorcerer. Body, strength 1. 5, 0. 4, agility 0. 9, 0. 6, vitality 1. 4, 0. 5, mental strength 1. 3, 0, 1. Status, mental strength depleted, recovering from serious injuries. The numbers in brackets in the self-examination report were his current physical stats. Comparing the two, he could more directly feel the extent of his body's deterioration. Grimm sat quietly, waiting for his body to slowly recover. The tall Lord of the Flames guarded the gate of the Wizard's Pagoda, helping the potion master Farrell quickly eliminate every demon hunter that barged into the area. It seemed that the family still valued Farrell's talent as a potion master. Otherwise, they would not have assigned him such a low position. With the help of the Lord of the Flames, Farrell, who was not adept at combat, could finally relax. He turned around to look at Grimm, who was in pain, and tossed a small green potion bottle at him. He said in a hoarse voice, "Rub this on your wounds. It can relieve the burns caused by the fire origin energy." Grimm caught the bottle and held it in front of his eyes. A green potion was slowly vibrating inside the colorless and transparent vulcanized test tube. When the cork was pulled out, a unique aura of life force was released. Grimm looked down at his hands and could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly. His originally fair and slender hands were now as black as charcoal, and their surface was covered with fine wrinkles and cracks. If he exerted a little force, the charcoal-like skin would crack open, revealing the black finger bones underneath. Even though the leaf of life in his mouth was slowly but steadily healing the burns on his hands, the burns this time were caused by the violent fire element law released by the light of flames. If he did not remove the strands of law energy, his hands would not be able to recover. The new flesh would be instantly evaporated by the high temperature and heat of the fire element law, leaving his hands in this state forever. Even though this part of the fire element law came from him, when he used the body of a fire demon to control the fire element law that he was not familiar with, the backlash of the law was extremely terrifying. If he did not absorb or neutralize the dissipating law energy, his hands would not be able to recover. This also meant that he would not be able to use both hands to cast spells in a short period of time. Grimm tried to drip a drop of the potion on his left hand. The moment the green liquid came into contact with his shriveled flesh, a crisp popping sound could be heard. Pieces of charred flesh burst open, and wisps of bright red flames rose from within. Then, they were gradually extinguished by the green liquid. Soon after, that area of skin gradually became plump and supple. Grimm smiled and nodded at Felicia. Only then did he dare to rub the green liquid on his burnt hands. Following the continuous crackling sound, strands of the law of fire were pulled out and slowly dissipated in the air. Grimm's hands had also returned to their normal white and slender state. As for the pain and numbness caused by the exploding skin and growing flesh, Grimm used his powerful power of the will to suppress it. He was the only one who could fully understand the meaning behind all of this. During this time, Wizard Forgan, who was covered in a layer of frost, barged in along with a howling cold wind. He sat cross-legged in another corner of the hall and began to quickly heal himself. "This is for you." Wizard Forgan casually threw over a giant ice crystal. Inside it, the frozen radiant knight could be vaguely seen. "Use this to please that little vampire lover of yours. Maybe you'll be able to get intimate with her immediately." He. Seeing a high-ranked magus, who usually did not smile, tease him like this, Grimm was speechless for a while. However, the value of a well-preserved Radiant Knight's body was definitely much higher than his tattered bones that were about to be burnt to a crisp. Therefore, Grimm's eyes lit up as he accepted the frozen knight. Chapter 230. The defensive perimeter of the wizards was getting smaller and smaller. In the end, all of the wizards were forced to the entrance of the Wizard's Pagoda, where a thick elemental barrier was erected, barely blocking the green dragon's dragon breath. During this time, another magus fell to the Radiant Knight's butcher knife. Takner, an illusory master, was rumored to have learned some wind element wizard spells. Unfortunately, his excellent talent in illusory spells could not guarantee his safety when facing multiple enemies, and his simple wind element wizard could not help him escape from the enemies. Thus, in the chaotic battlefield, he was held back by a group of demon hunter knights, and fell to the Radiant Knight Winsel's Sword of Glory. But at the last moment of the battle, Mary, Phantom, and Evil Shadow returned with a large group of reinforcements, allowing the wizards to hold on for another half an hour. Not to mention the others, Blood Lady Mary alone brought back 5 magic-breaking knights, vampires. When they landed on the ground and transformed into human forms, they possessed powerful defense and close combat abilities. Once they encountered danger, they could instantly transform into vampire bats and flee. Thus, the addition of this new force undoubtedly gave the wizards, who lacked quality meat shields, a chance to catch their breath. With the entrance of the Wizard's Pagoda as the last line of defense, all of the wizards retreated to the inside of the entrance, using the 3 body-tempering wizards and the vampire knights as meat shields to form a solid line of defense. All the demon hunter knights who tried to attack the entrance had to endure waves of wizard spells before they could get close to the body-tempering wizards and engage them in close combat. It was only then that Grimm had the chance to observe the battle style of the body-tempering wizards from a close distance. From the outside, the body-tempering wizards looked like a group of muscular men with strong physiques. They rarely wore light cloth robes like the wizards' robes, and most of them wore leather or metal armor instead. Their weapons were also similar to those of mercenary warriors. As wizards who relied on their physique and strength to crush their enemies, their most powerful weapon was their physical body. Even though they had mastered some wizard spells, their main purpose was to make it easier for them to engage in close combat. Their 2-meter-tall height did not give them an advantage over the demon hunter knights who were riding magic colts and wielding rune swords. However, Once the anatomy refinery sorcerers and the demon hunter knights collided, the demon hunter knights would definitely be the ones to break their bones. The physique refinery sorcerers' bodies were flashing with different effects of sorcery. They were rampaging in front of the gate, knocking any demon hunter knights that entered their line of sight off their demonic colts and shredding them alive. In the course of the battle, even if the demon hunter knights fought valiantly, they could hardly leave any obvious wounds on their bodies. Their flesh and blood seemed to be cast from steel and iron, and when swords and sabers slashed at them, they would produce metallic clangs. The only ones who could harm them were the magic breaker knights. If it was a one-on-one battle, those outstanding spell breaker knights might have a body that was not inferior to a physique refinery wizard. However, with the help of the sorcery aura, the anatomy refinery sorcerer's stats increased explosively. This made it difficult for the two of them to be on the same level. What was the effect of having their strength and physique doubled? Grimm's visual scan was very clear. The anatomy refinery sorcerer's punches had a terrifying attack power of 40 to 50 degrees, and their violent attacks had a terrifying effect of more than 100 degrees. This was almost on par with Grimm's most powerful fire spell. Berserk physical attacks and despair-inducing physical defense were probably the valiant methods used by anatomy-tempering magi to subdue their enemies and achieve victory. Although most of these body-tempering sorcerers had mastered a certain number of witchcraft, these witchcraft were not used to attack the enemy, but rather to assist themselves, allowing them to better exert their physical strength. Moreover, these anatomy refinery sorcerers were not just barbarians who only knew how to use their physical bodies. The armor and weapons they were wearing were all carefully selected sorcery artifacts. Some of them could aid in the recovery of physical injuries, and some could activate wind wings or speed to make up for their lack of mobility spells. With these three human-shaped killing machines rampaging outside, the Demon Hunter Knights could not even think of forming a good vanguard formation and could only be turned into a pile of loose sand by them. At this time, the group of vampire knights also had the space to pick up the slack. Together with the carrion beetles, they formed a second line of defense, continuously killing the demon hunter knights who were rushing forward. Although the anatomy refinery sorcerers looked like muscular barbarians, once they encountered a radiant knight that they could not defeat, they would immediately retreat to the entrance of the wizard's pagoda. At this time, it was the turn of the gathered sorcerers to use their violent spells to kill the radiant knights. Even though the radiant knights were of a higher rank, they could not avoid the berserk spells that rained down on them. Even with their physical bodies and the defensive power of the rune equipment, they could only defend against elemental damage below 100 degrees. Once multiple spells were stacked together, the damage they could inflict was astonishing. In this world, only the level 3 dragon knights could withstand the spells of a dozen level 1 sorcerers and charge forward to kill. In comparison, the level 2 radiant knights could not do that. Hence, as the 3 dragon knights stepped into the battlefield, the situation on the side of the sorcerers took a turn for the worse, and the entrance of the wizard's pagoda became precarious. The entrance of the wizard's pagoda was not large. The 5-meter wide space might be enough for 3 or 4 demon hunter knights to squeeze in, but to the dragon knights who needed a larger space to fight, it was only enough for one person to fight. Hence, when a man and a dragon appeared at the entrance of the wizard's pagoda, the battle immediately intensified. The level 2 green dragon, Isindra, first blasted the light barrier in front of the entrance into a sky of fluorescent light with a thick green dragon breath. Only then did the level 3 Dragon Knight Jefferson step into the entrance with determined footsteps. The first one to charge at him was Keel. He had obviously activated some kind of special witchcraft effect, temporarily transforming himself into a 3-meter-tall little giant. A layer of strange black armor appeared on the surface of his almost naked body, and there was a terrifying horn that looked like a rhinoceros horn erected straight on his shoulder. With heavy footsteps that could shake the earth and mountains, Keel rushed forward violently and leaned over to knock into Jefferson, who was alone. Behind him, a sky full of wizard halos rained down on the Dragon Knight. Most of them were single-target spells, but there were also a few area of effect spells. A dull thud resounded. The horn on Keel's shoulder clashed with Jefferson's longsword. The violent ripples of energy caused terrifying ripples to appear in the surrounding air. Jefferson stood firmly in place and did not take a step back, but Keel was like a ball that had been whipped. His whole body tumbled and flew out horizontally. For a moment, no one could see the extent of his injuries. The only thing that could be seen was that wherever he passed, there were large pools of blood along the way, as well as some broken pieces of armor and stomach. Keel's body was still tumbling in the air. 2 green magic halos had already entered his body, and his injuries were instantly healed. There were also 3 support-type halos that flashed before disappearing in a flash, strengthening his physical body once again. Therefore, in the shortest time after landing, Keel stood up again and began to crazily gulp down large bottles of health potions. Unfortunately, after becoming a physique refinery wizard, his body's resistance to potions had increased countless times. Therefore, the potions that were effective in the past were now drunk like a bull, bringing little effect. However, it was better to be useful than useless, so Keel could only pinch his nose and crazily gulp them down. Just as Keel was trying his best to heal himself, the second physique refinery wizard, Monroe, also roared and rushed forward. Another move to defeat the enemy. Rank 1 physique refinery wizards were still too fragile in the face of a rank 3 Dragon Knight. If not for the huge increase in their bodies that allowed them to close the gap in strength between them and the other party, they would have already lost their lives in that short exchange. Sorcery rained down on Jefferson one after another. Some turned into a cluster of crazily growing blood-sucking vines, entangling him in place. Some turned into a cloud of strange smoke, corroding the life force field around him. And some turned into terrifying elemental sorcery, drawing everything in the surroundings into a violent elemental tide. However, all these could not stop the advancement of a rank 3 Dragon Knight. The blood-sucking vines entangled him like spider silk on a wheel. As Jefferson moved forward, the terrifying vines that were as thick as a child's arm broke into pieces, green juice splattering everywhere. The poisonous smoke and elemental sorcery might be extremely powerful, but it was difficult to wear down the thin layer of life force on the surface of his body in a short period of time. This life force field formed by the combination of runic energy and life force was invisible, but it was real and had a defense that far exceeded that of an elemental shield. Be it elemental sorcery, curse sorcery, illusion sorcery, or soul sorcery, it was difficult to break through this life force field and completely damage the Dragon Knight's body. Therefore, in order to stop the Dragon Knight's advance, the only choice was to confront him head-on. Hence, every sorcerer who rushed forward to confront Dragon Knight Jefferson would end up rolling on the ground. However, in order to stop his advance, everyone could only give it their all. After the 3 anatomy refinery sorcerers were injured, it was the turn of the bloodline sorcerers. After they transformed into magical creatures, they at least had a strong physical body. It was just that they did not have the in-depth study of close combat skills like the anatomy refinery sorcerers. After Hyde, who had transformed into a mechanical octopus, and Mary, who was covered in blood shadows, were seriously injured, it was the arcane sorcerer's turn to fight. However, compared to the rock golem and the giant earth elemental, which were trash that could be defeated in one blow, the evil worm Indix, strange giant worm, which was formed from more than 30 carrion beetles, displayed astonishing combat strength. The carrion beetles' tough carapace, coupled with their strange damage-sharing ability, allowed them to gather and scatter randomly. They circled around the Dragon Knight and kept him occupied for a long time. Chapter 231. The brutal battle continued. The powerful Dragon Knight Jefferson was finally forced to retreat by the crowd. The price the wizards paid was that all of them were heavily injured. Even a level 2 wizard Forgan was not spared. It was only because of the crowd that Forgan managed to get the opportunity to use Ice Crystal Explosion to injure his opponent and force him out of the wizard's pagoda. But when another dragon knight walked into the wizard's pagoda with steady steps, the wizards were on the verge of despair. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Just as the wizards were about to lose their will and began to secretly think of a way to escape, the entire war wizard's pagoda suddenly trembled for no reason. Complicated magical patterns and wizard runes appeared on the walls, floor, and ceiling of the hall on the first floor of the wizard's pagoda. A rich elemental aura that they had not felt in a long time blew toward them, making every wizard feel relaxed. It was as if they had suddenly returned to the wizard world. The war wizard's pagoda has been activated. The sorcerers' faces were filled with surprise and joy. A transparent barrier of light, filled with a rich elemental aura, once again covered the wizard's pagoda's door, sealing the shocked dragon knight Kalek inside. Outside the barrier, a violent green dragon was furiously slamming and tearing at the light door. Unfortunately, its attacks were futile. The sharp dragon claws and thick dragon breath couldn't do anything to that thin light barrier. Kalek was filled with fear. He turned around and slashed at the barrier a few times. When he realized that it was a complete waste of time, he stopped his meaningless actions and turned around to look at the group of wizards with weak auras. "Little fellows, this is really your misfortune." Kalek's expression was unusually ferocious. "Since I can't get out for now, then it's your time to die. Cry. Howl. Then you can die." Faced with Kalek's threat, the wizards did not show the slightest hint of fear. Instead, a strange smile appeared on their faces. Just as Kalek could no longer tolerate the strange atmosphere and was about to take a step forward to start a massacre, a feminine and evil voice suddenly rang in the hall. "Cry? Howl? That seems like something you're about to do. You're just a bug from a second-tier plane. Don't think that you can be arrogant here, just because you have a giant dragon supporting you. Now, let Lord Purple Eye fight you." A mysterious, purple-robed sorcerer with purple pupils appeared in a corner of the hall, glaring coldly at the Tier 3 Dragon Knight, Karek. Rank 3 Magus. The mental fluctuations radiating from his body were bona fide Tier 3. This was a Rank 3 Magus. With the appearance of this wizard, Kalek suddenly felt an indescribable discomfort in his body, as if there was an invisible shackle firmly shackling him. Even breathing became difficult. Under the shackles of this invisible shackle, the originally violent and domineering aura on Kalek's body continued to fall, and every move he made carried a touch of indescribable weakness. "Damn it, what is this?" The horrified expression on Kalek's face could no longer be concealed. His uneasy eyes wandered around, trying to find the cause of his weakness. However, in the next second, the Rank 3 wizard completed a terrifying bloodline transformation in front of him. He turned into a terrifying, 7-meter-tall, purple-eyed giant. He had a bloated body, indigo skin, and a fierce appearance. But the most eye-catching thing was the purple pupils that covered his entire body. When the evil eye giant roared and rushed towards Dragon Knight Kalek, Wizard Forgan dashed towards the second floor of the War Wizard Tower without looking back. The rest of the sorcerers also came to their senses and quickly left the secret spell hall. This was a battle between Rank 3 powerhouses. If their strength had not reached a certain level, a group of Rank 1 wizards like them would not even have the chance to watch the battle. Not to mention participating in the fight. Just the aftermath of the fight between the two was enough to easily flatten them. Therefore, seeing Lord Forgan's reaction, the other wizards hurriedly followed. Walking through the unusually crude stone tunnel, the wizards felt relaxed like never before. It was as if they had returned to their own plane of origin. Although they had already adapted to the planar laws of this plane of knights, in the end, they had only adapted to it. They had not truly integrated into this plane of existence. Therefore, when the familiar aura surged within the wizard's pagoda, the Rank 1 wizards who had just condensed their law core felt it the most. To them, this law core was a form of strengthening and sublimation, but it was also a form of restriction. Without the law core, it would be difficult for them to freely control the sorcerer world's planar laws. If they wanted to continue to grow stronger, they would need to continuously strengthen their law core and make their soul and plane of consciousness more closely linked. However, it was precisely because of the existence of the law core that they were branded with the strong consciousness of the Magus world. No matter how many planes they ruled, no matter how many worlds they traveled, no matter where they were in a multiverse, their body, mind, and soul all belonged to the great wizard world. This was determined from the moment they were born in the wizard world. Only in the sorcerer world could their souls and bodies be truly liberated. Only in the sorcerer world could they obtain peace and tranquility of their souls. Once the wizard world met with a calamity, the wizards who depended on the wizard world would have their paths cut off, unable to advance any further. This was the most fundamental reason for the existence of the wizard faction. Wizards were all evil and selfish. They worshipped the accumulation of knowledge and resources, but they were more willing to use their intelligence and profound knowledge to defeat one enemy after another. When a sorcerer's strength reached a certain level, they would also have the ability to leave the plane, survive, and develop independently. However, no matter how powerful they became, the wizard world was still their root, the source of their souls. That was why the powerful sorcerers, who had extended their reach to many planes, had formed a loose sorcerer faction in order to protect their roots and their homes. Together, they resisted the other powerful races and planes of the multiverse. Grimm and the rest had all advanced to become rank 1 wizards in the wizard world. When they condensed the law core in their spiritual consciousness, their consciousness was already tied to the consciousness of the plane in the wizard world. They were bound together for good or bad. Thus, when they suddenly sensed the aura of the wizard world in another world, the breathing of the wizards became much smoother. Countless elemental particles visible to the naked eye spread out from within the walls of the wizard's pagoda and clustered around them. They were colorful, as if they were draped in colorful clothes of different colors. Grimm was a fire elemental wizard, so the particles surrounding him were dense fire elemental particles. Sniffing the fire elemental particles that assaulted his face, Grimm felt extremely comfortable. It was as if every pore was hungrily absorbing the elemental particles that he hadn't seen in a long time. This was only a vague feeling, but the AI chip in his mind gave him the most direct data. Beep. Environmental monitoring report. Fire elemental particles density increasing rapidly. 11%, 12%, 13%. In this small plane where the elements were scarce, they had long gotten used to the harsh and cruel environment. Now that the plane's shackles have been broken, all the sorcerers were overjoyed. Deep in their hearts, their sense of identity and belonging to the sorcerer world grew stronger. They were just passers-by in this world, and the wizard world was where they came from. At this moment, almost all the sorcerers had the same thought in their minds. Ferocious rumbles traveled through the long tunnel, and even the wizard's pagoda began to tremble slightly. This was partly due to the battle between the experts on the first floor, and also due to the ferocious attacks of the demon hunters outside the pagoda. After all, this wizard's pagoda of war was a simple, weakened version. The defense of the pagoda could not be compared to the original wizard's pagoda. Thus, they could not allow the bugs outside to be so arrogant. Comrades, the wizard's pagoda of war has been activated. Wizard Forgan raised his arms and shouted, "Now, all of you return to your positions. Let those ignorant native bugs know how powerful we are." Following his impassioned declaration of war, the AI chip's voice sounded in Grimm's mind. Detected connection request for mental energy channel. Host, please indicate whether to connect. Connect. As soon as Grimm gave the order, Forgan's cold and cruel mental energy wave sent him a set of coordinates. The wizards in the area did not say anything else. They all turned around and ran back to their positions. Grimm was fighting in a secret witchcraft room on the 3rd floor. The room was so simple that it made one's heart ache. Other than a mysterious wizard formation in the middle of the secret room, there were no other decorations or decorations. On the hard rock walls of the secret room, powerful elemental energy flowed through spell formations. As far as the eye could see, there were energy circuits, energy nodes, runic spell formations, conversion spell formations. All of these familiar yet unfamiliar things were vivid in his mind. If this was the original Wizard's Pagoda, these wizard formations should be hidden in the middle of the layers of the tower. How could they be exposed without any concealment or protection? Grimm was sure that even a small fireball from him could create a giant hole in the defense system of the Wizard's Pagoda. From this, it could be seen how rushed the wizards who built this Wizard's Pagoda were. Although he had not been a wizard for a long time, this simple wizard formation was not a problem for Grimm. As soon as Grimm stepped into the wizard formation and stood in the middle of the wizard ring, a strange mechanical voice rang in his head. "Welcome, Wizard Grimm. You have received the authorization to control this attack spell formation. Do you want to activate the attack spell formation now?" This was the voice of the tower spirit of the Wizard's Pagoda. However, it seemed like it was still in the most primitive stage of intelligence. That was why the attack spell formation needed an official wizard to control it to unleash its full power. Activate. Chapter 232. When the attack spell formation was activated, the entire secret room suddenly disappeared before Grimm's eyes. It was as if the War Wizard's Pagoda had suddenly become transparent, allowing Grimm's vision and senses to extend to every corner of the battlefield. It was a unique perspective of looking down at the battlefield from above. It was as if Grimm had suddenly turned invisible and was hovering 40 meters above the ground, silently looking down at the dense crowd and the rain of rune arrows that were as dense as a swarm of locusts. With a dull thud, a giant rock crashed into the ground not far from Grimm's head. Then, a giant dragon covered in dense green scales flew across the sky, opening its mouth to release a terrifying dragon's breath at the Wizard's Pagoda. Meanwhile, the Tier 3 Dragon Knight stood firmly on the green dragon's back and brandished its dazzling longsword, sending one condensed energy blade after another at the tower's body. A giant crack appeared in the transparent tower in front of Grimm. Even though most of the cracks were quickly repaired by the circulation of elemental energy, there were still some small cracks left behind. If he allowed the enemy to continue attacking, the War Wizard's Pagoda that had just been activated would not be able to withstand it. Grimm let out a low grunt, his mental energy seeping into the spell formation beneath his feet. Immediately, a massive amount of fire elemental energy flowed into his body through the tower. Without the control of an official wizard, the attack spell formation would only be able to continuously release wizard fireballs to attack the enemy. But with a controller like Grimm, the power of its attacks was immediately increased by several levels. Whoosh! A lava fireball the size of a millstone howled as it charged out of the Wizard's Pagoda, crashing directly at the green dragon and the Dragon Knight on its back. The sudden attack had clearly frightened the two. The green dragon's massive body flipped to the side in an attempt to dodge the fireball. But just as the lava fireball was about to brush past the green dragon's neck, it suddenly exploded. In the next second, the raging sea of magma and lava fragments engulfed them, while the scattered flames also brought disaster to the knights on the ground. A shrill dragon roar shook the entire battlefield. The green dragon, covered in crimson lava, flapped its wings and soared into the sky, finally escaping the area of the lava fireball. On the other hand, the Dragon Knight on its back was covered in a layer of dazzling life force and was clearly unharmed. They did not suffer too much damage, but the demon hunters beneath their feet could not do the same. They had been knocking their arrows and trying their best to attack the door of the Wizard's Pagoda with rune arrows when they were engulfed by the rain of fire falling from the sky. The land within a 50-meter radius had been set ablaze, and they could only put away their bows and arrows and use their energy shields to escape the area. Some of the slower ones had their armor set ablaze, making them look rather pathetic. However, this lava fireball was like a starting gun. In the next few seconds, 4 to 5 different colored spells shot out from the War Wizard's tower, landing precisely in the area where the Demon Hunter Knights were the most concentrated. A strange, khaki-colored halo landed on the ground. The 5 to 6 Demon Hunter Knights who were within the range of the halo suddenly felt their bodies sink. They groaned and knelt on the ground. 2 Demon Hunters at the edge of the area barely managed to escape, but the other 3 Demon Hunters at the center of the area fell to the ground. Blood gushed out from under their thick armor. It was obvious that their flesh and bones were crushed by the terrifying gravitational force. A gray halo flashed by not far away, and countless strange shadows appeared in the air. These shadows were like shadow creatures without physical bodies, continuously charging into the bodies of the demon hunters within Halo. The demon hunter knights would groan in pain with every shadow that entered their bodies. Those who managed to escape in time were fine, only suffering some damage from the shadows. Those who did not manage to escape in time knelt on the ground, spitting out large mouthfuls of black blood that was filled with shattered organs. What was even more terrifying was a crackling chain of lightning. When the terrifying lightning snakes wriggled among the crowd, every demon hunter knight who came into contact with the lightning snakes was instantly burnt to a crisp and fell to the ground. With just this attack, 9 demon hunter knights had become victims of the terrifying lightning element wizard spell. After the terrifying chain of lightning had exhausted its energy, it slowly disappeared from the battlefield, leaving behind a large patch of charred corpses and a pungent burnt stench. Seeing the wizard spells continuously appearing in the battlefield, Grimm's face revealed a hint of shock. The terrifying power of the War Wizard's Pagoda on the battlefield was simply astonishing. If a level 1 wizard like him were to be placed in a battlefield, he would have to think of ways to stop the enemies from advancing, and also try his best to kill as many enemies as possible. He would also have to carefully assess the rate at which his mental energy was being depleted, and try his best to reserve enough wizard power to deal with any sudden changes. Hence, in the previous battles, Grimm could only use 6% of his energy to attack the enemies, the remaining 2 to control the situation, and the remaining 2 to protect himself. He could only achieve such a high efficiency with the help of the magic puppets. If it were any other wizard, it would be a miracle if they could use 4% of their energy to kill the enemies. But his safety was greatly guaranteed when he was within the War Wizard's Pagoda. Coupled with the amplification of the wizard formation beneath him and the continuous flow of energy, he could almost unleash the greatest power of his attacks. Fire Demon, Master of Pyromaniac. As a powerful elemental wizard that specialized in fire, the abilities Grimm had chosen for himself were actually the most suitable for the battlefield. Once he let go of his psychological burden and unleashed the full power of his fire element wizard spells, the battlefield in front of him immediately turned into an apocalyptic lava hell. A wide flaming magic wall sealed the entrance of the wizard's pagoda, and the demon hunter knights could only grit their teeth and endure the burning of the magic flames if they wanted to attack the elemental barrier at close range. A large meteor shower instantly enveloped the area in front of the main entrance of the wizard's pagoda, and the fiery meteors that fell from the sky blasted a giant crater in the ground. The terrifying waves of fire came wave after wave, and the demon hunter knights had no place to hide. As long as there were more than 5 demon hunter knights in Grimm's line of sight, a lava fireball that streaked across the sky would land accurately on their heads. Regardless of whether the lava fireball exploded or was destroyed, the terrifying lava rain would still overturn them. Not a single one of them would be spared. As for the unusually eye-catching Spellbreaker Knights and Radiant Knights, there was no way they could dodge the continuous, exploding fireballs. The only thing they could do was move from one area of fire to another, forever surrounded by the exploding wizard fireballs and the raging sea of fire. Even though most of the attacking wizard spells were destroyed by them in midair, the fire element wizard spell's unique ability to burn made it impossible for them to find a safe place around the wizard's pagoda. They had only been controlling the attack spell formation for less than a quarter of an hour, and there were already 2 Spellbreaker Knights who could not withstand the continuous exploding fireballs and lava fireballs tragically falling into the sea of fire. It was the same on the ground, and it was the same in the sky. Two of the four green dragons circling the War Wizard's pagoda were level 3. However, the moment they flew closer to the wizard's pagoda, the waves of wizard spells spewing out would scare them into flying away. They no longer dared to fly within a mile of the wizard's pagoda. No matter how strong the magic resistance of the giant dragons was, they would still have to take a detour when faced with a dozen powerful wizard spells. But below the wizard's pagoda, the dragon knights were burning with anxiety as they watched the demon hunters being trampled by the endless waves of wizard spells. No matter how hard they tried, the green dragons would be forced out of the wizard's pagoda by the monstrous wizard spells. Previously, before the wizard's pagoda was activated, the knights' battle techniques they unleashed from afar would cause the pagoda to shatter and shatter. But now, whenever the violent energy blades got close to the wizard's pagoda, they would be blocked by a dense elemental barrier outside the pagoda, unable to damage it in the slightest. This transparent elemental barrier made the dragon knights gnash their teeth in hatred. The battle techniques they unleashed would be blocked by the barrier, but the wizard spells shot out from within the pagoda could be projected without any resistance. The two dragon knights roared in anger at the fact that they were unable to retaliate despite being beaten up. However, there was nothing they could do, especially when their companion, the level 3 dragon knight Kalek, was also blocked by the transparent elemental barrier within the wizard's pagoda. No one dared to imagine what would happen to him. Just as the group was panicking, unsure of how to continue attacking the wizard's pagoda, the space above the tall spire of the wizard's pagoda distorted, and two figures eerily appeared. One was a female wizard in a green robe, her entire body wrapped in green smoke. The other was a male wizard in a purple robe, his body covered in strange purple pupils. Their bodies were overflowing with powerful spiritual undulations. Shockingly, they were two terrifying rank 3 magi. Kalek, it's Kalek. The dragon knight Jefferson's shrill voice rang in the air. He could clearly see that among the two evil wizards, the purple-robed wizard was holding the head of the dragon knight Kalek in his hand. The helmet that the dragon knights usually wore was missing, and the head's messy hair was loose, caught in the hands of the wizard. The half-covered head had a ferocious look on its face, its eyes wide open, and there were faint traces of blood at the corners. The wound on the exposed neck was uneven, and blood was still dripping down. It looked like it had been forcibly torn off by someone. The two dragon knights felt the pain of their companion's tragic death. Their eyes were bloodshot, and they roared as they urged the green dragons to charge forward. The other two green dragons looked at each other, raised their heads, and let out a long dragon roar. They followed their companion and charged forward. 4 green dragons, 2 tier 3, 2 tier 2, and 2 tier 3 dragon knights. In the knight's plane, such a team would be considered terrifying. But at this moment, there was a kind of tragic and stirring feeling as if he was going to meet his death. The roar of a green dragon came from the forest in the distance. Then the green dragon, O'Farrell, charged into the sky with a tall and mighty knight on his back, quickly rushing toward the battlefield. Chapter 233. The War Wizard's Pagoda. Due to the rush of construction, the facilities here were shockingly simple. Other than the 5-story elemental pool, there were almost no other wizard spell facilities in the energy room on the 2nd underground level. Even the elemental pool that was already in use looked crude and clumsy. Even the walls of the pool were uneven. Many plant roots and rotting branches could be seen in the holes. It was obvious that the soil had not been carefully filtered before it was molded. At this moment, the 11 wizards were floating above the elemental pool, continuously taking out magical crystals from the storage space they carried with them and throwing them into the pool. In the elemental pool beneath their feet, the magical crystals that had piled up like a small mountain were disappearing at a visible rate. Once an ordinary wizard's pagoda was activated, it would constantly absorb elemental particles from the surrounding space and gather them in the elemental pool to form a stable elemental energy. A portion of this energy was used to maintain the wizard's pagoda's normal energy consumption, while the rest was gathered in the elemental pool as energy reserves. Thus, the longer the wizard's pagoda was in operation, the more shocking the wizard's energy reserves would be. Under normal circumstances, attacking such a wizard's pagoda would not be worth it. It would be extremely difficult to successfully attack the wizard's pagoda without using up all the energy it had accumulated over the years. But this war wizard's pagoda had just been activated. Where to get its energy reserves from? Thus, in order to maintain its normal operation, the wizards of the Salubo family could only throw in a large number of magical crystals to supply the wizard's pagoda's energy consumption, especially now that the wizard's pagoda was facing a terrifying dimensional war. The elemental barrier on the body of the wizard's pagoda had to withstand hundreds of fierce attacks at every moment. And this was using up the magical crystals in the elemental pool, not to mention the wizard's pagoda that would be bombarded every 5 minutes. A dozen large-scale wizard spells were exploding all over the place, blasting the demon hunters outside the pagoda until they were in complete disarray. And this was using up the magical crystals in the elemental pool. Therefore, even if the 11 magi were to crazily throw mana crystals into the elemental pool, the energy reserves were still not enough to make up for the loss, which made them anxious. Furthermore, as the ferocious wizard energy circulated rapidly within the internal defense system of the wizard's pagoda, it would occasionally cause minor explosions and damage. Thus, every time the tower spirit's stiff voice rang in the space, a wizard would rush to the site of the explosion to repair and maintain the damaged wizard spell formation. It couldn't be helped, as the construction was too rushed. The entire defense system of the wizard's pagoda had been put together at the last minute. They were already very lucky to be able to operate smoothly and not explode into the sky due to a huge mistake. As for that small mistake, he would just have to deal with this war first. However, as the 2 level 3 wizards engaged in an intense battle with the Green Dragon team in the sky above the wizard's pagoda, the wizard's pagoda was losing more and more energy every second. Every family's wizard held a space wizard tool with a huge storage capacity in their hands. They opened their entrances and slanted downwards. Sparkling and translucent mana crystals rained down from the sky and piled up into a small hill in the elemental pool. Mysterious runic wizard formations floated on the walls of the elemental pool. As the fluorescent light rippled, the crystal-like magical energy crystals were shattered by the wizard power, then turned into the purest elemental energy and fused with the wizard formation on the walls of the pool. The energy was then transmitted to every corner of the wizard's pagoda through the energy channels that covered the entire wall. Every time the wizard's pagoda shook violently, a layer of the magical energy crystals in the elemental pool would be shaved off. When the wizards in the wizard's pagoda shouted and released a volley of wizard spells, the magical energy crystals in the elemental pool melted like snow under the scorching sun. The family's wizard in charge of maintaining the energy supply had a bitter look on his face as he put away the empty space wizard tool. He then took out a new one from his bosom, used a secret code to unseal its opening, and continued to pour the space wizard tool while gnashing his teeth. One had to know that these were the hard work of the Salubo family over the past 100 years. Each magic crystal could be exchanged for 150 wizard gold coins in the sorcerer world. They had poured so many magical energy crystals just now that they had poured out more than 30,000 of them. But this was just the prelude to the war. As the battle heated up, the consumption of the magical energy crystals would increase to a terrifying level. Every second of this war was consuming a mountain of money. Of course, outsiders would not be able to understand the pained cries of the family's wizards. On the higher levels of the wizard's pagoda, a dozen wizards were excitedly standing within the attack spell formation, trying their best to convert the endless stream of wizard energy into a terrifyingly powerful wizard spell, then viciously smashed the demon hunter knights charging in front of the wizard's pagoda. A group of knights with only bows and swords, without any siege weapons, without a strict organization or leadership, wanted to attack the wizard's pagoda of war that was going all out. Today, the wizards would use their wild and ferocious wizard spells to teach these arrogant frogs a good lesson. And the price they would pay was their own blood and flesh. Grimm controlled the attack spell formation as he pleased, shaping the surging wizard energy into powerful wizard spells. He then used his mental energy as a guide to project the spells to the most suitable location. With the defense system of the wizard's pagoda, Grimm did not need to expend the wizard energy in his body to continuously cast powerful wizard spells. Furthermore, the offensive spell formations within the wizard's pagoda were inscribed with countless supplementary spell formations, able to add special offensive effects to the wizard's spells released, such as increasing the range, maximum effect, penetration. With these wizard spells, even a level 2 Radiant Knight would find it difficult to defend against their barrage of attacks. But at that moment, Grimm's attention was focused on the battle above him. He had retreated long ago from the level 3 battle that had taken place in the Hall of Secret Spells on the first floor and did not have the chance to witness it with his own eyes. But now, 2 level 3 wizards were fighting a group of green dragons and dragon knights above the wizard's pagoda. One could imagine how excited and shocked Grimm was. He had to admit that these 2 level 3 wizards were as terrifying as demon gods. The purple-robed sorcerer who killed the grade 3 dragon knight seemed to be a bloodline sorcerer. He once again transformed into a terrifying purple-eyed giant, hovering in the air. His purple eyes shot out hundreds of terrifying purple rays of light at every moment. The power of each purple ray might not be that great, but the power of hundreds of rays stacked on a single person's body was unimaginably powerful. Grimm also suspected that these purple rays had special wizard effects. Otherwise, the green dragons would not have avoided them. It seemed that even the bodies of dragons could not withstand the damage. As for the green-robed female wizard, she seemed to be a powerful figure as well. With a shake of her body, she transformed into a terrifying poison wyvern and clashed head-on with the green dragons. Poison wyvern, purple-eyed giant? Grimm quickly searched through his mind and quickly found information about them. Poison wyvern, poison magical creature, semi-dragon. Power limit, level 5. At the end of the day, it was not a purebred giant dragon, but one of the thousands of semi-dragon branches created by the giant dragon race. According to legend, due to the giant dragon race's lasciviousness and their ultimate transformation spell, which allowed them to transform into any living creature, the giant dragon's great undertaking of sowing the world was never restricted by their size or race. Thus, semi-dragon species with the giant dragon bloodline could be found in almost any material plane. And the poison wyvern was one of the many semi-dragon species. They looked like skinned green dragons, their bodies covered in sticky and smelly green liquid, and their most powerful weapon was the terrifying venom they spat. In terms of race characteristics, the poison wyvern's venom was 3 times more poisonous and 5 times more corrosive than the green dragons. Perhaps it was because they were so ugly that the emerald dragons, the upper race of the green dragons, refused to acknowledge their status as a branch of the green dragons. As a result, all poison wyverns were extremely hostile toward the source of their bloodline, the green dragons. Moreover, both of them had the same bloodline source. This also meant that as long as the poison wyvern continued to devour their upper race, the green dragons, they could quickly strengthen their bloodline power. Thus, as long as the poison wyvern met the green dragons, it would usually mean an unprecedented battle to the death. And the purple-eyed giants seemed to be a branch of the ancient giants. During the period when the multiverse was just born, the order of the plane world had not been completely established. At that time, the most powerful race active in the various material planes were the various giants. Sand giants, demonic giants, hundred-eyed giants, hermit giants, forest giants, sun giants, ocean giants, cloud giants, fire giants, stone giants. These terrifying giants, who could easily reach a height of 100 meters, had once ruled the material planes for millions of years. Unfortunately, As the laws of the plains changed, their overly powerful strength became their burden, and the giant race gradually retreated from the stage of history. However, although most of the powerful ancient giants had disappeared, their bloodline had been passed down for tens of thousands of years, and had also created many powerful bloodline creatures. Even now, the frost giants, storm giants, hill giants, cyclops giants, and hundred-armed giants could still be found in the material planes. These were the bloodlines of the ancient giants. As for the purple-eyed giant that the magus in front of him had transformed into, Grimm had never heard of it. So he had reason to suspect that this was a mutated bloodline that had been contaminated by magic. In other words, this was a mutated bloodline that had come from a magic laboratory. Chapter 234. On the ground, blood and flesh splattered everywhere. In the sky, a giant dragon roared. The demon hunter knights, who had always been invincible in this dimension, finally lowered their heads in front of the evil wizards. Having never experienced the cruelty of a dimensional war, they could not break through the transparent light screen shrouded in elemental light with just their passion and bravery. As for themselves, they fell tragically under the violent wizard spells that rained down on them. There were over 3,900 demon hunter knights who could successfully pass through the forest of death and reach the wizard's pagoda. But with the activation of the war wizard's pagoda, their numbers were rapidly decreasing. It was a delusion to try and break through the wizard's pagoda with just their bodies. As the demon hunter knights fell to the ground, howling in pain, the entire battlefield descended into a bloodbath. There was no longer an inch of pure land around the wizard's pagoda. Exploding witchcraft fireballs, sizzling acid-rot swamps, and blinding lightning purgatories were all over the place. Expressions of extreme fear froze on their twisted, hideous faces as they were kicked around by the fleeing knights. Corpses of all shapes and sizes lay in the scorched earth and blood. Flesh, charred bones, and all sorts of filth were mixed together, making it difficult to identify them. Broken swords, twisted rune bows, broken corpses of demon colts, as well as the corpses of knights that were too horrible to look at. The entire battlefield was filled with such scenes, causing everyone who witnessed this scene to feel fear in their hearts. But compared to the battle between the powerful fighters in the sky, the battle on the ground was insignificant in this dimensional war. The future of the dimension still depended on the few figures in the sky. The activation of the War Wizard's Pagoda did not just give the wizards a platform to fight to their heart's content. More importantly, it used its powerful elemental control to create a free zone around the Wizard's Pagoda that was beyond the control of the laws of the dimension. Here, the wizards who came from another dimension no longer had to be restrained by the laws of the dimension and had the space to unleash their full power. Hence, when the level 4 Holy Knight Willis arrived in the sky above the Wizard's Pagoda, a strange illusory figure blocked his path. Wizard Salubo's soul projection. Due to the upper limit of the realm's power, he could only exhibit the strength of a peak tier 4 combatant, even if he projected all of his power into the realm. It didn't sound like he had any advantage. However, this was a tier 4 projection with the profound knowledge and mind of a tier 6 great sorcerer. Hence, when the two of them clashed, the intense battle between the type 3 powerhouses instantly paled in comparison. If it was said that low-ranked magi relied more on the power of powerful spells or the strength of their bodies when they fought with others, then high-ranked magi's battles were more inclined towards the use of laws and countermeasures. The grade 4 soul projection stood silently in the air, and no matter what Willis did, he could not touch it at all. Regardless of whether it was the poisonous dragon breath of the green dragon beneath him or the ferocious battle techniques of the knights, they would all pass through the humanoid illusory figure unimpeded, bombarding the wizard's pagoda until it shook violently. It was as if that humanoid shadow did not exist in this plane. Just as Willis was at a loss for what to do, the humanoid figure's counterattack came. The other party's counterattack was a series of gray rays. Every ray that landed on the green dragon or dragon knight would instantly cause their limbs to wither and their flesh to wither. The terrifying aura of death required several times the amount of life force to extinguish it. Willis's powerful night battle techniques could not be used against these strange death rays, and his fragile humanoid form could not defend against the invasion of the power of death. Left with no choice, Willis could only roar and transform into a giant green dragon covered in dense scales. He used his tough dragon scales and powerful life force to try his best to delay the damage of the power of death. Other than the death rays, the humanoid illusory figure also shot out a continuous stream of sharp-boned spears. The spears had terrifying penetrative power, capable of piercing through tough dragon scales. In an instant, the green dragon or Pharrell, who could not dodge in time, was riddled with holes, hissing in pain as he fell from the sky. One-sided, a complete one-sided battle. Even though both of them were at grade 4, the strange abilities displayed by the humanoid figure were enough to completely suppress Willis, who only had a powerful physical body. Furthermore, based on Willis's battle style, Grimm was certain that he had a unique giant dragon bloodline. In other words, the leader of the Knights, who was highly respected by all the demon hunters, was most likely a half-dragon. The reason he was able to successfully cross the threshold of grade 4 was probably related to the giant dragon bloodline flowing in his body. From this point of analysis, the Dragon Valley behind the Kingdom of Knights was not as simple as he had imagined. The demon hunters on the ground were no longer a threat to the Wizard Tower of War. Under Forgan's leadership, all the wizards joined forces to cast a terrifying large-scale wizard spell, using a terrifying ice crystal explosion to freeze a grade 2 green dragon in a 3-meter-thick ice crystal. With the intervention of the Wizard's Pagoda, the team of green dragons that was already at a disadvantage immediately collapsed. The remaining 3 green dragon camels carrying the dragon knights were chased around by the terrifying magical creatures that the 2 wizards had transformed into. Their defeat was something that could happen in a day. Half an hour later, with a shrill dragon roar, the green dragon that Willis had transformed into had his wings entangled by the white bone chains that had appeared out of thin air. He fell from the sky at an angle. However, not only did the humanoid phantom not take advantage of the situation to rush down and kill him, but instead raised its head and looked at the huge cloud in the distant sky. It said coldly, "You've been watching for so long, and you still don't plan to make a move? Since when did you, giant dragons, develop the habit of ambushing people from behind?" In the sky, the white clouds scattered. Slowly, 2 enormous dragons that were far larger than the average giant dragon appeared. Streamlined, dark green dragon scales, ferocious and terrifying horns on their skulls, large membranous wings covered in fine scales, thick and powerful hind limbs, and a giant dragon's mouth filled with sharp teeth. Judging from the deep luster of the green dragon's scales and the terrifying dragon aura that no one dared to look directly at, these should be 2 grade 4 giant dragons. Unlike Willis, who was a hybrid tier 4 green dragon, these 2 were bona fide tier 4 dragons. Moreover, they were adult dragons at the peak of their dragon age. The giant dragon in the front was exceptionally muscular and majestic. It slowly flapped its dragon wings and floated in midair. Its giant amber eyes stared unblinkingly at the humanoid figure. It said in a loud voice, "Mighty Sir Wizard, the Tyrell Green Dragon tribe greets you." Of course, this giant dragon was roaring in dragon language. Normal people might not be able to understand it, but as the servants and guardians of knowledge, how could the wizards not understand it? Under Wizard Forgan's signal, the War Wizard Pagoda's cannon fire temporarily stopped, and the sky regained its peace. Both sides looked at the humanoid figure and the 2 giant dragons that had arrived later. In a cruel planar battlefield like this, the ones who truly decided the outcome of the battle were the top fighters like them. No matter how intense the battle below was, no matter how many casualties they had to pay, once the powerful fighters on their side were defeated, the tables would be turned in the blink of an eye. At this moment, not only were the wizards within the Wizard's Pagoda holding their breaths as they awaited the orders from the higher-ups of both sides. Even the Radiant Knights, who were covered in blood and had been reduced to a sorry state, stopped in their tracks and stared at the clouds, silently waiting for their fates. No, this was not just the fate of their group, but also the future of this plane. Tyrell Green Dragon? I think I've heard of this name before. It seems to be a servant of the Sagus Emerald Dragon tribe. The humanoid figure hesitated. Even though the wizards could understand dragon language, it was difficult for them to communicate with the giant dragons using it. This involved the unique voice structure of the giant dragons, so Wizard Salubo's projection could only respond with the common language of the wizards in the wizard world. Your vast knowledge is indeed worthy of my respect. I, Raislin, leader of the Tyrell Green Dragon tribe, have come here today in hopes of taking my tribesmen away. Only your tribesmen? Wizard Salubo's words had a hint of mockery. Only my tribesmen. The leader of the Green Dragon tribe, Raislin, was extremely determined. With the voice of a giant dragon, even a soft whisper would be as loud as thunder in the ears of an ordinary person, much less Raislin's roar that sounded like an oath. Beneath the War Wizard's pagoda, in the forest, on the hill, countless demon hunters, including the spell-breaking knights and radiant knights, looked at each other, unsure of what they were talking about. Only the few green dragons, as well as Willis, who had his wings bound and was struggling to get up, understood Raislin's words. No, we can't give up. Willis forcefully raised his head and roared. They're all my subordinates. I can't just abandon them like this. Father, we still have a chance to win. As long as we work together, we can definitely defeat this bunch of evil wizards. Wizard Salubo's projection let out a cold laugh, a sinister smile appearing on his face. Raislin lowered his body slightly, his large dragon eyes staring calmly at the struggling Willis. Willis, my child, are you still unable to recognize your identity, even at this moment? Those humans, they're only your subordinates and subordinates. But now, the ones facing death are your real tribesmen. Do you plan to let O'Farrell and I send or die with them just for a bunch of subordinates? Willis's green dragon giant face revealed a pained expression. He looked around and saw the green dragon Isendra, who was sealed in a thick layer of ice crystals. He also saw the green dragon O'Farrell, whose body was pierced by bone spears and lying in a pool of blood on the ground. Willis closed his eyes in pain, big drops of tears rolling down his face. Even though he was unwilling to admit it, he knew in his heart that they had already lost this battle. Chapter 235. The giant dragons had all flown away. Even the 3 injured giant dragons rose into the sky with difficulty with the help of their companions, disappearing into the horizon without looking back. There were no dragons to explain anything to the demon hunter knights beneath their feet, much less to protect them as they retreated from the battlefield. Seeing the giant dragons soar into the sky and then fly away, all of the demon hunter knights' morale collapsed. From the 2 dragon knights who had been abandoned to the normal demon hunters who were covered in wounds, everyone was shocked by the cruel reality before them. The glory of the past had now become a pile of chicken feathers that could not be picked up even if they wanted to. Amidst the low sound of the horn, the surviving demon hunter knights finally began to retreat. In an instant, the depths of the forest were filled with panicked demon hunter knights. They had fled so quickly that they could no longer care about their injured companions and the glory of the knights. They threw away their weapons, took off their armor, and plunged into the forest, leaving the battlefield that had caused them such a crushing defeat without looking back. The wizards did not pursue these defeated demon hunter knights. Instead, they withdrew most of their forces back to the War Wizard's Tower and started assigning tasks. The reason why they did not pursue them was not because the wizards did not hold grudges against them, but because there was no need to, since the ruler behind the scenes of this dimension had given up on them. These demon hunter knights were no longer a threat. If they kept them alive, they might even join them after the wizard faction was formed. By then, they would have a ready-made group of elite subordinates. 100 miles away, a group of green dragons were perched on a high cliff, silently looking back. "Father, why did you give up such a good opportunity just now?" The enemy was only a level 4 wizard. "We could have taken him down with our abilities," Willis asked angrily. It was obvious that he still hated the decision made by the leader of the green dragons, Raislin. "You are still too young. You know too little about wizards." Raislin's giant dragon head swayed slightly. "Singe, you tell him." As an elder of the family, Green Dragon Singe also took on the role of a dragon prophet. Every giant dragon tribe would have their own dragon prophet, and their status was second only to the leader of the family. They were also the main way for the giant dragons to communicate with the great dragon god, or rather, the only way. Ahem. Green Dragon Elder Sung spoke. "Willis, you can't blame your father. That terrible wizard is not someone we can fight against. He's not a rank 4 magus, but a rank 6 great magus. So what if he's a grade 6 great sorcerer?" Willis stood up angrily. "This plane can only hold up to grade 4 power. Here, he can only display the strength of a peak grade 4 combatant. If we go all out and kill his doppelganger, he won't be able to establish a foothold here. Things are not as simple as you think." Elder Singe shook his head in pain. "He's a rank 6 great magus. This means that once he activates his domain of origin, it's possible for him to break through the limits of the plane and project all of his power here. Although he'll have to pay the price of being expelled from the plane, as long as he kills all of us in a short time, the remaining low-ranked magi will still be able to control this plane. That's why I've said it before. Once this plane is targeted by evil magi, its fate is sealed. If we, the Tyrant or Green Dragons, were a little stronger, we might be able to fight them back. However, if the price we have to pay is the lives of you, Offrel, and the other dragons, then I'd rather just give up on this plane." The leader of the Green Dragons, Raislin, silently looked down at the surrounding forest, his huge eyes filled with indescribable grief. After all, this plane was the home that the Tyrer Green Dragons had managed for thousands of years. Now that it had been forcefully occupied by magi, it was impossible for him not to feel pain in his heart. However, the Tyrer Green Dragons were still too weak. Once they started a war with the magi, close to half of the adult dragons in the family might die on the battlefield forever. This was something he absolutely could not accept. Willis lowered his huge dragon head dejectedly. Although he was unwilling to admit it, he knew that this was the only thing his father could do for the entire family. "Let's go back." Raislin suddenly spread his dragon wings and roared angrily. "The magi will move very quickly. We have to rush back to the Dragon Valley as soon as possible. Moving the Dragon Tomb and the Dragon Altar will take a lot of time. Let's go." Following a loud and majestic dragon roar, a few green dragons took to the sky, flapping their wings and flying into the distance. The battle had completely ended. However, the flames of war that had been ignited were not so easily extinguished. After going through a harsh dimensional war, the Wizard's Pagoda had also stopped operating, revealing its ugly, battered body to the world. The materials used to create the Wizard's Pagoda were not standard wizard stones, and its various properties were naturally unable to reach the level of a standard Wizard's Pagoda. During the war, with the support of the powerful defense system of the Wizard's Pagoda, all of its flaws were covered, making it look indestructible. However, once the Wizard's Pagoda's fluorescent light dissipated, the many magi could see the terrifying cracks and countless fine cracks that ran through the body of the Wizard's Pagoda. Some of these damages were caused by external attacks, while some were caused by substandard materials that could not withstand the massive amount of energy it had been circulating. In short, without a large-scale renovation, the Wizard's Pagoda of War would not be able to display its terrifying dominance on the battlefield again. However, just as the magi of the family were busy cleaning up the battlefield, refining wizard beasts, and maintaining the Wizard's Pagoda, Grimm and the other magi who had performed well on the battlefield were granted an audience by the great Lord Salibo. The audience was one-on-one. The venue for the meeting was a dark, gloomy, and mysterious hall. After going through this battle, Grimm had gained a preliminary understanding of the level 6 Great Wizard Salabo. He was definitely a powerful undead wizard with an affinity for the elements and walked the path of an undead wizard. However, Grimm was still confused about his class advancement. He couldn't see through it all. Usually, magi with an affinity for the elements could choose to deepen their elemental talents and walk the path of a dark wizard who specialized in spells and curses, or they could learn some arcane wizard's anatomy knowledge and walk the path of a summoner wizard who could refine undead creatures and summon the undead. Of course, if they did not like to entrust their power to external objects, they could also walk the path of an undead wizard who could strengthen themselves. Apart from these mainstream advanced professions, there were many more indescribably powerful wizard professions that could be chosen according to the individual's talents, hobbies, and path of development. That was why it was difficult for Grimm to guess the path of the Great Wizard based on his performance in today's battle. However, there was no doubt that the Great Wizard was powerful. At the very least, the attacking giant dragon was intimidated by his might and chose to retreat instead of fighting to the death here. That was why when Grimm saw the projection of the powerful level 6 Great Wizard in the dark and gloomy palace, he was extremely respectful of the Great Wizard's profound knowledge and terrifying power. "I have been watching your growth." The Great Wizard's words made Grimm's heart tremble. "As an outsider, you are a very talented fellow. Although you are weak now, there will be a day when you grow up." Grimm bowed to hide his shock. "Don't panic and don't be afraid." The Great Wizard's face was hidden in the black light and could not be seen, but his words were quite gentle. "Foreign souls like you are not rare in the sorcerer world. However, as long as you completed your advancement in the sorcerer world, it means that you have obtained the recognition of the world will. No one can take away your status as a wizard." Grimm could no longer hide the shock on his face. "You are still too weak, and it is difficult for you to understand these principles." The Great Wizard's projection was obviously in a good mood today and explained a few words. "Laythorn is the sorcerer world we live in. Every year, there will be dozens, even hundreds of plane invasions. These creatures and souls from the outside world may be a potential threat to weaker planes, but to a large plane like Laythorn, it is a rare benefit. Don't the Magi worry that these outsiders will harm the development of the plane?" Grimm could not help but ask. Harm the development of the plane? The Great Wizard's projection almost laughed at Grimm's words. "Little fellow, your thoughts are really arrogant. Even we great wizards do not dare to think of interfering with the development of an entire plane. And you, a mere level 1 magus, dares to think so? Ha ha! But didn't the book say that the most powerful magi can already embed their origin laws into the laws of the plane, making them a part of it? You said it yourself. That is something only the most powerful magi can do. In our sorcerer world, to be able to do this, one has to be at least a rank 8 magus. And in our sorcerer world, how many rank 8 magi are there? 3, only 3. Grimm was stunned for a moment. There were only 3 rank 8 magi in the sorcerer world. This number seemed to match the number of large magus organizations in the sorcerer world. Could it be? All right, you don't have to be so paranoid. I called you here because of your good performance in the previous planar war. As a reward, you could take this Balrog's heart." With that said, a huge heart the size of a head was thrown into Grimm's arms. The heaviness of the heart left him speechless. Dark red flesh, thick tendons, and a disgusting aura of depravity. The giant heart that looked like a peach was still beating tenaciously, and he could vaguely sense a strong aura of life from it. The Balrog's heart. This was the heart of a powerful Balrog. In the terrifying Abyss world, creatures like the Balrog had always been recognized as rank 2 creatures. Just as Grimm was overjoyed with the Balrog's heart, the Great Wizard's projection spoke once more. "I heard that you are very interested in the knowledge of runes in this plane. That's good too. I have a mission for you to complete. What you need now is..." Chapter 236. Scandrii. As the capital of the Kingdom of Knights, Scandrii was undoubtedly a magnificent and glorious city. There were no city walls, and Scandrii was built along the mountains. Most of the buildings in the city were embedded into the undulating mountains. Looking down from the Minnesota mountains, one would be able to see the entirety of Scanley in one's eyes. Under the bright sunlight, tall obelisks and domed halls could be seen everywhere in the spacious palace. Exquisite corridors connected the left and right, and maids in palace attire shuttled back and forth. If one were to look a little further, one would be able to clearly see the crowds as tiny as ants in the bustling market at the foot of the mountain. Orderly streets, bustling with people, Scandrii was filled with a warm and peaceful atmosphere. However, at this moment, in front of the tallest palace in Mingsu Mountain, at the edge of a spacious and flat open-air platform, the old but spirited Edward VII had his hand on the railing, silently looking down at the lively city beneath him. Behind him, Knight William, who was wearing exquisite knight armor and holding a protective helmet, was reporting loudly. As a radiant knight at the peak of Grade 2 who could advance at any time, Knight William was the king's most trusted chief of guards, shouldering the great responsibility of protecting the capital. Recently, as the Night King Willis and the three Dragon Knights rushed to the Greenland forest to eliminate the invaders, the capital's defense forces were mobilized by half. Hence, as the chief of guards of the capital, Knight William's burden was getting heavier and heavier. Is there still no news from Willis? Edward VII waved his hand and interrupted William's report, his brows knitted tightly as he asked worriedly. No news yet. The most recent news was 7 days ago. The news from Blue Hill City said that the Knights have found the invaders' nest. Although they encountered stubborn resistance, the progress was considered smooth. However, due to the difficulty of resupplying, the Knights are temporarily unable to conquer the enemy's last stronghold. However, Count Winlier of Blue Hill City has sent all his men to help transport supplies. It is estimated that we will hear news of victory in 4 to 5 days. Even though it was good news, Edward VII still could not get rid of the haze in his heart. For some reason, there seemed to be an illusory voice in the unseen world sending him a warning. What was going on? They were clearly about to win, but where did this lingering palpitation in their hearts come from? Edward VII suddenly stopped pacing, turned around, and asked in a stern voice, "What are the movements of those heretics in the prison?" This! Knight William looked like he was in a dilemma, as if there was something he wanted to hide. Speak. Speak quickly. Edward VII stepped forward and grabbed Knight William's arm. Did they do anything unusual? He asked angrily. Those heretics who call themselves sage prophets have already committed suicide in prison. They were screaming crazily before they died. Knight William hesitated for a moment, and finally said, it seemed like they were shouting something like the arrival of evil, the betrayal of the dragons, and other crazy things like that. Evil has descended, and the dragons have betrayed us? Edward VII took a step back in horror and muttered to himself in panic. Impossible! This is impossible! The giant dragons had signed a covenant with our ancestors. They couldn't possibly. However, before he could finish speaking, a loud and clear dragon roar suddenly came from the distant horizon. Immediately after, a majestic and powerful dragon's might suddenly spread across the capital. Knight William took a step forward, grabbed the railing, and stared at it carefully, then turned back and shouted, "Your Majesty, it's the dragons, it's the dragons. The Kingdom of Knights have been founded for more than 1,700 years. Because they had always been on good terms with the Valley of Dragons, and had also signed a covenant with the dragons, they had received a lot of help from the giant dragons in the continuous wars to defeat the foreign races and suppress the ambitious nobles. To this day, at a certain spot in the back of Mingsu Mountain, there was a magnificent and exquisite palace built to serve as the sleeping quarters of the three dragon knights and giant dragon companions. However, although they were on good terms with the giant dragons, wherever they went, their terrifying dragons might was still not something that ordinary people could withstand. Therefore, according to the covenant, the giant dragons were not allowed to invade and break into any city of the kingdom. And this covenant had been well implemented and abided by for thousands of years. But today, the giant dragons suddenly came in a group. What were they trying to do? On the distant mountain range that stretched out to the two wings of Mingsu Mountain, the hurried sound of bugles rang out continuously. There was a watchtower built there, and it was obvious that the guards had also noticed the dragons. As the sound of the horn echoed throughout Scandrila, all the citizens of the imperial city rushed out of their residences and looked in all directions in confusion. Obviously, they still did not understand the content of the warning. Two balls of green light flashed across the horizon. Immediately, the rocks on the cliff near the watchtower crumbled, and the guards of Wu Guard fell down along with the platform. Edward VII's heart tightened when he saw the scene before him clearly. The giant dragons. The giant dragons actually attacked the war facilities of the kingdom. The meaning behind this was self-evident. Under the terrified gazes of the two, the figures of the giant dragons grew bigger and bigger. Finally, a heavy dragon's might, so oppressive that it almost made people want to commit suicide, came pouring down. The giant dragons had arrived at Skander City. The giant dragons that flew into the capital were obviously adult green dragons, and their appearance was full of pressure. They had shiny, dark green dragon scales, and each of them was the size of a face. They had lean and angular dragon bodies and sharp and metallic dragon claws. From the top of their heads to their tails, they were covered in ferocious and terrifying bone spikes, and the ends of the spikes shone with a chilling glint under the sunlight. The bodies of the giant dragons were not as fat and bloated as those of the giant forest beasts. Their dense scales grew close to their bones, and their perfect and smooth body curves gave them the terrifying abilities of the top hunters in the plain. When the abundant dragons might spread throughout Skandra City, the capital immediately fell into chaos. Countless citizens who had never experienced dragons might fled in all directions, screaming for their parents. It was a terrifying scene, as if the end of the world had arrived. The green dragon in the lead looked at the panicking human figures beneath it and let out a loud dragon's roar in satisfaction. This dragon's roar seemed to be in order. As the dragon's roar rang out, more than 10 humongous green dragons stretched their necks and roared at the same time. Then, they flapped their huge membranous wings and pounced toward the tallest or most beautiful palace in the city. Edward VII, who was looking down from the top of the famous palace, could see very clearly that a terrifying green dragon lowered its body and flew near the huge storeroom of a famous trading company. First, it spat out a thick green dragon's breath. The human guards guarding there instantly melted into puddles of green liquid amidst shrill cries. After using its dragon's breath to get rid of the reptiles in its way, the green dragon pounced on the storeroom and used its thick dragon claws to tear open the roof, revealing the jewels and treasures inside, as well as all the goods Ling Lang had. Broken beams and rubble from the roof rained down. The green dragon reached out its claws and picked up the chests of treasures. Then, it flapped its wings and flew toward the largest square in the city. Countless green dragons attacked in all directions. Every time they rose and landed, they would target the storerooms of the trading companies, the warehouses of the auction houses, or the city's treasure vaults. All the guards and guards who obstructed their movements would be turned into dry bones by the poisonous dragon's breath that filled the sky. Even the defenseless residents or servants would be attacked by the green dragons as long as they appeared in their hunting areas. Storerooms were overturned and treasure vaults were opened. Chests of treasures and mountains of gold coins were swept out by the green dragons and quickly gathered in the city square. Over there, 3 green dragons had transformed into burly giants. They swiftly packed and crated the spoils of war. They were extremely busy. Under Edward VII's wide-eyed gaze, groups of green dragons flapped their wings and flew into his palace. They were plundering wantonly. Every time their huge bodies landed on the roof of the palace, it would inevitably be accompanied by a rain of rubble. Countless weak princesses and princes, surrounded by guards and maids, screamed and ran out of the palace. And he saw with his own eyes that one of his most beloved beauties couldn't escape in time and was crushed under a collapsed house. Edward VII staggered a few steps back as a hurricane blew in front of him. The green dragon with the most terrifying body flapped its huge wings and slowly rose from the bottom of the platform. Its huge emerald eyes were staring unblinkingly at the two people on the platform. William unsheathed his dazzling long sword and rushed in front of His Majesty to protect him. Although he was ready, William, a peak grade 2 Radiant Knight, didn't dare to attack rashly in the face of a gigantic grade 4 green dragon. Edward VII also stood up shakily with the help of the many guards who rushed over. Why? Why? Edward VII shouted hoarsely. Lord Good, we have a dragon covenant between us. Why did you suddenly attack our city? Attack? The huge green dragon's slender face revealed a human-like expression. No. This is not an attack. We green dragons have always been noble creatures who keep our promises. We would never do something so shameless as to break our promises. Not an attack? You're saying that this is not an attack? You led a group of dragons into the capital of an ally and plundered wantonly. You dare say that this is not an attack? Edward VII's voice was completely hoarse, and his waving arms made him unsteady on his feet. Edward VII was 143 years old, after all. Although he took good care of himself, in the plane of knights where the maximum lifespan was 200 years, he was still an old man. As he questioned William hoarsely, his right hand trembled as he showed a pigeon egg-sized ruby hanging from his neck. Somehow, when Edward raised the ruby up high, a dense energy radiance shot out from the inside of the ruby, transforming into an ancient and mysterious contract text in the void in front of him. The Dragon Covenant is here. I order you to leave this city. Edward VII roared hoarsely. Ha! An ancient covenant naturally needs to be respected, but the traditions of the dragon race can't be abandoned so easily. We're not here to attack you, but to collect protection fees. Kings of the humans, you have received the protection of the Tyrol green dragons for more than 1,000 years. Now, it is time for you to hand over the protection fee. The Tier 4 green dragon Nagda's huge eyes swept across the projection disdainfully. Nagda spat out a few words, then turned around and flew toward the city below. Chapter 237. Grimm arrived at Scandra City on the 5th day after the dragon raid. Standing on a steep peak in the Mingsu Mountains, Grimm could clearly see the rubble beneath his feet and the pitiful wailing of the people in the capital. Along the way, as long as it was a city of certain size, it would not be able to escape the plundering of the dragons. This was the 7th human city that he had seen being raided by the dragons, and it was the most miserable one. After all, this was the greatest and most magnificent city in the Knight's Kingdom, Glory City, Scandra. Unfortunately, it had now become a dilapidated city that was buried in debris and broken walls. Countless homeless residents of the capital were searching for food and clothes in the broken houses. Convoys of refugees were crowded on the road out of the city. People were shouting and horses neighing, and the air was foul. The buildings at the foot of the mountain were still in good condition. After all, it was a civilian area. Therefore, it suffered the least from the dragons' raids. As they climbed up the mountain, the damage to the buildings became more and more serious. Grimm could see that the more beautiful the buildings were, the more serious the damage and collapse. It seemed that the dragons were quite proficient in the way of plundering. Grimm pulled down his hood, revealing his firm and handsome face under the sunlight. Looking down at the miserable capital of the Knight's Kingdom, Grimm's heart was filled with endless sighs. Once upon a time, the dragons were the greatest support of the human emperors. They were also the firm cornerstone of their rule. Since the Dragon Valley suddenly appeared in the plain thousands of years ago, the human kingdoms had established a close relationship with them. The dragons enjoyed the offerings of the humans, and the humans received the protection of the dragons. Whether it was the powerful monsters in the natural world or the ambitious nobles, they all saw the dragons in the Dragon Valley as the true rulers of the Night's Plane. As for their king in name, he was nothing more than a pitiful worm crawling in front of a giant dragon. 1,700 years ago, the Edward family was only a small noble family in the local area. However, they still worshipped the giant dragons and promised them countless benefits and a huge amount of wealth in one go. Thus, under the protection of the Dragon Valley, the Edward family rose to power and defeated all the local nobles. They then destroyed a powerful kingdom and established the so-called Night Kingdom. Thanks to the Dragon's Covenant, the Edward family welcomed 1,700 years of peace. However, the heavy tribute from the giant dragons also made this Night Nation extremely weak, and they no longer had the power to control the entire Night Continent. Even though the Night Kingdom was subservient to the Dragon Valley and listened to everything it said, with the dimensional upheaval imminent, it was still impossible to stop the Dragon Valley from breaking the Night Kingdom's backbone and extracting the last bit of its essence and wealth. It seemed like he was a step too late. Those shameless dragons had completely ransacked the city. However, Grimm wasn't here for worldly wealth and money. He was here for a mission from Lord Cerubo. Of course, it was also for the rune energy fusion knowledge that he had been dreaming of. Now, the entire royal city of Scandrilla was in ruins. He hoped that the target he was looking for was fine. On the only bluestone road leading into the city, there were expressionless people pushing carts, herding livestock, and dragging their families out of the city. There were mothers hugging their children and crying, old men leaning against the ruins with numb expressions, and adult men with eyes full of hatred. Their expressions were different, but they were all covered in dust and looked like they wanted to cry, but had no tears. Grimm had seen such expressions many times along the way. After all, this was the great royal city of the Night Kingdom, and it had an inexhaustible amount of wealth. Thus, it was especially favored by the giant dragons. 4 or 5 consecutive days, there would be groups of giant dragons flying from the distant sky almost every day, running into the city to plunder wantonly, and then returning with big and small bags full of goods. In order to avoid the dragons' plundering, the rich merchants and nobles in the city fled the cursed city, leaving pitiful commoners with nowhere to go. However, as the dragons wreaked havoc day after day, the city gradually died. Even the commoners who had nothing left had no choice but to painfully leave the familiar homeland that they were born and raised in. It was in the midst of the chaos that Grimm entered Scander City. Although he tried his best to change into an old and ordinary gray traveling cloak, as he walked, he could still see the exquisite robe decorated with runes through the corner of his clothes. Although some people with ulterior motives could not understand the patterns, it did not stop them from identifying the value of the robe. Hence, behind Grimm, there were some unlucky fellows with ragged clothes and rough faces, holding sticks and forks in their hands. Grimm passed by a half-tilted tower, followed a gray stone path, and turned into an alley. Seeing this scene, the eyes of the rogues lit up, and they strode into the alley. The fight was very short. If it weren't for the fact that the dragons would discover the traces of the witchcraft wave, a simple witchcraft fireball would have been enough to kill all of these blind guys. But now, Grimm could only raise his fists and use brute force to knock them to the ground one by one. As the group of people rolled on the ground in pain, Grimm grabbed the chin of a tall and skinny thug and lifted him up. "Where's the capital's demonic foundry camp? Bring me there immediately, or else." Grimm's iron pincer-like right hand suddenly turned red, and in an instant, a burnt palm print was left on the thug's face. "Evil, you're an evil." The few thugs immediately recognized Grimm's identity, and all of them were terrified. After all, Grimm was only a fire elemental magus and did not know much about the soul. Otherwise, he would not have needed to threaten and bribe them to lead the way. Unfortunately, even after Grimm interrogated them, he did not get any information about the capital's demonic foundry camp. Just as Grimm was frowning and thinking about how to get rid of them, a crisp voice of a child came from the ruins beside him. It's impossible for these people to know where the demonic foundry camp is. Grim was startled, and he quickly released his spiritual force and locked onto this unexpected intruder. It was a skinny young man who looked to be only 11 or 12 years old. He was hiding behind a collapsed wall with his stooped body. His aura was weak, and Grim did not release his spiritual force. Hence, he was able to hide from Grim's eyes and ears. "You know about the demonic foundry camp?" Grim tilted his head and looked at the person who had suddenly appeared. "You're a spellcaster too?" Grim could faintly see a trace of an extremely well-hidden elemental aura on him. "If you want to find the demonic foundry camp, then follow me." The skinny youth's face was ashen, and he looked no different from a homeless youth who had been malnourished for a long time. However, Grim could still see the huge life force hidden in his body through his elemental vision. With that, the youth formed a seal with both hands, and a faint green rune appeared between his palms. Next, a similar rune flashed on the foreheads of all the thugs present. In a few breaths, the youth removed the rune and turned to leave. The thugs fell to the ground and fell into a deep sleep, as if they had forgotten everything in the blink of an eye. It was a very primitive method of forming hand seals, and it seemed to be similar to the methods of cursed magi. However, the most important thing was that the elemental undulations from this method were almost negligible. Even though Grim was less than 10 meters away from him, he still had to rely on the AI chip's powerful scanning to capture the frequency of the elemental undulations. It seemed that the spellcasters of this world were still able to survive under the pressure of the demon hunters, and had developed some interesting tricks. Grim patted the dust off his hands, and quickly left the scene with the skinny youth. A loud dragon's roar suddenly reverberated in the sky above the capital. The remaining people in the capital immediately hid, and there were no traces of anyone in the dilapidated streets. Countless eyes filled with anger shot out from various hiding places in the city, staring at the 3 green figures that were quickly circling in the sky. The youth also hid in a half-collapsed house and observed the movements of the dragons through the gaps in the roof. After circling a few rounds, the 3 green dragons once again pounced on a palace halfway up the mountain. Soon, the screams of women and the angry roars of men rang out in the distance. Asterisk, thud, thud, thud. Asterisk, dozens of crossbows hit the shining scales of the leading green dragon, creating dazzling sparks, but they did not cause any visible damage to it. These 3 green dragons were obviously young dragons that had just reached adulthood, and their hunting experience was obviously not as good as the veteran green dragons from a few days ago. Faced with the daring counterattack of the reptiles beneath them, the 3 green dragons angrily spat out a large amount of poisonous fog. Soon, the world became peaceful again. The 3 green dragons rushed into the palace and pavilion, and immediately launched a fierce looting that caused the house to collapse. The skinny youth silently looked at the ugly scene that happened 4 miles away. He knew that he should be satisfied with the price that these nobles had to pay. However, when he saw this scene, his heart was filled with inexplicable pain and anger, as well as a trace of unconcealable sorrow. He turned around, and there was not a single trace of pity or regret on Grim's calm face. Finally, he could not help but speak. Chapter 238. Perhaps knowing that he could not get the answer he wanted from Grim, the skinny youth did not wait for an answer and rushed out of his hiding place. An hour later, Grim met the mastermind behind the scenes in a commoner's cave at the foot of the mountain. It was an old man whose eyes were wrapped in black cloth. Grim could not see any traces of mana flow on his body, nor could he sense any powerful spiritual waves. But for some reason, the moment Grim saw him, he immediately felt a sense of reverence and respect. Sage? Prophet? Or prophet? The blindfolded old man lived in a remote, small, and low-grass hut. Along the way, Grim saw many strange people in the surrounding alleys. These people looked exactly the same as the skinny youth who led the way. Although they looked inconspicuous, their frail bodies hid a powerful force that suppressed restlessness. It was obvious that these people were hiding around the straw hut, protecting the blindfolded old man. This blindfolded old man was obviously one of the evildoers of this plane. Now, Grim finally understood why the skinny youth could find him so easily. With such a person leading the way, it was likely that his arrival was within the other party's expectations. Grim hated these guys who were always so mysterious. Although they had the strange ability to communicate with the heavens and earth, it was not a common elemental spell. Hence, their ability to communicate with the heavens and earth could not be prevented or isolated. In the Magus world, one could offend anyone but a Magus with prophecy spells. Otherwise, one would not even know how they died. Welcome, guest from another plane. I am Marth. As the host, the blindfolded elder used such a sentence as an opening remark. He did not use the word intruder, which was filled with hostility. Instead, he used a more neutral word guest. This was enough to show the other party's eagerness to communicate. It's an honor to meet you here, Lord Marth. I'm Grim, a Magus from the Magus world. As for why I'm here, I'm sure you already know. Grim pulled down his hood, revealing his face and bowing politely. Looking at Grim's young and handsome face, a bitter smile appeared on Mar's face. I've already experienced the might of the great warlock in your camp. Gert, that brat, took the liberty to try it, and was punished by your great wizard to the point where not even his bones were left. Even the rest of us were affected by the plane's backlash and lost our eyes from then on. His Excellency Great Sorcerer is able to use the level of laws to counterattack an enemy thousands of miles away. This kind of method is already enough for us to admire him. Was there such a thing? Grim was slightly surprised, but his expression did not change. He continued to look at Prophet Mossy with sincerity. Sage, prophet, different titles corresponded to the same group of people, and the changes in their titles corresponded to the level of their abilities. Sage, almost everyone who had just started practicing prophecy would receive such a title. They didn't get the feedback they wanted every time they coupled with the plane's consciousness. Even if they did get the feedback, it would be messy and broken. Therefore, such people knew good and evil, and were more likely to seek good and avoid calamity than ordinary people. Prophets were slightly more powerful than sages. Almost every time they made a prophecy, they would receive feedback from the plane's consciousness. However, it was limited to their individual structure and vision. The amount of information they received from the plane's feedback was also related to their abilities. These people had already grasped the power of destiny and could peer into the future through the plane's laws. Therefore, they would often become the guides of certain races or tribes, enjoying great honor. As for prophets, they were even more terrifying. They were usually spellcasters who possessed great power. Not only could they peer into the future, but they could also use their own power to distort or change the direction of certain branches of destiny. Therefore, sorcerers with the identity of prophets were extremely terrifying existences even in the sorcerer world. Although Grim, who came from the sorcerer world, did not have any talent in prophecy, it did not stop him from understanding the depths of Marth's abilities through his superior knowledge. To be honest, in a small plane, under the cruel and strict suppression of the Demon Hunter Knights, Mossy was able to successfully become a prophet. This was already beyond Grim's expectations. Although such people did not have strong and powerful execution abilities, they had the powerful ability to peer into the operation of the plane's laws. They were more like a pair of eyes that floated above the river of fate, emotionlessly and coldly watching all the people who were caught in it, sinking and drifting along. According to Grim's knowledge, there were many prophets in the Sorcerer World's Silver Alliance. They were willing to give up all of their sorcery abilities just to peer deeper into the river of destiny. They hid in the Prophet's Tower of the Silver Alliance and did not step out, but they knew everything that happened in any region of the Sorcerer Continent. They never intervened in disputes, nor did they abuse their abilities. They obediently did the work of the Eye of Destiny, copying scrolls and organizing records day and night. They used their hard work to record everything they prophesied on scrolls, and then hid them in secret rooms in the prophet's tower. Therefore, in order to understand certain puzzles in the past history, many powerful wizards often needed to visit this group of powerless lunatics in person, using their most precious knowledge and resources to ask for a chance to enter the prophet's tower to solve their doubts. But now, in another small plane, a prophet from another world was standing in front of Grimm. He could not help but feel a little confused. If he borrowed the eyes of this prophet from another world, would he be able to see the path of his future rise? Just as Grimm's mind was spinning with nonsensical thoughts, Mossy Prophet smiled faintly. Lord Grimm, don't expect me to help you. Every prophet is tightly bound to the plane they were born in. Even if I exhausted all my power, it would be impossible for me to project my vision into the depths of the sorcerer world. But didn't you prophesy my arrival? Grimm asked in confusion. That's because you're in this plane and you've left the great wizard. Mossy Prophet's face showed a trace of distress. If you had always stayed by the great wizard's side, I would not have dared to look there at all. But when you left the Greenland forest and your path of destiny intersected with mine, I saw you and saw your mission. Lord Mossy, as a powerful sorcerer of this plane, do you not reject my identity? Grimm pondered for a moment and finally asked the most difficult question. Fate. What is fate? Many people mistakenly think that we are above fate and that we can change it by seeing through it. However, prophets with such thoughts often find it hard to survive. At this point, Mars paused as though he had thought of someone or something. After a long time, he woke up from his memories and said, Actually, these people are wrong. No matter how powerful the prophet is, he will always be the slave of fate. He cannot be the master of fate. Fate is a shackle that firmly locks up everyone and everything within it. The trajectory of fate of all things is silently operating according to some kind of law, and there is no possibility of breaking free. Grimm listened in silence. What is fate? This is an unsolvable answer that all prophets have been searching for. Some prophets believe that fate is the inevitable result of all the laws of a world operating according to a system. As long as all the preconditions are the same, there will definitely be the same result. As a result, when there is enough accumulation, it will converge into fate. And some prophets believe that fate is a strange power that is independent of ordinary laws. Although it will to a large extent be coupled with the existing world, at the same time, it will constantly change itself. The river of fate is winding and endless. Perhaps it can even be divided into different levels, and it is full of unpredictable variables. So the flow of the river of fate is constantly changing, and, at the same time, it is also accepting new targets. These views obviously placed fate in a very high position, believing it to be one of the highest laws of power in the multiverse. This kind of high-level law is not something ordinary low-level creatures can control. The only thing they can do is understand and accept it and use it well. Seriously speaking, everyone living in the multiverse, every substance, every element has its own unique fate. This fate can become stronger or weaker as the host and the multiverse continue to couple. But if a certain plane chooses to seal itself, then everything in that plane will become fixed and predictable. When that time comes, the fate of the entire plane will become predictable. So as long as any plane does not want to become a pool of stagnant water, it must constantly integrate some outsiders, adding some variables to the plane's fate. But most of the time, whether this variable is good or bad, I'm afraid the plane's own power of fate cannot completely control it. Grimm's body could not help but tremble as he listened to the enlightenment of this prophet. At this moment, he seemed to understand the reason why he unexpectedly appeared in the sorcerer world. Chapter 239. The conversation with Moss the prophet was pleasant and relaxed. As long as any thoughts flashed through Grimm's mind, Prophet Mars would more or less be able to sense them. With the two smart people together, there was no need to beat around the bush or test each other's bottom line. With just a few words, they were able to establish a framework for future cooperation. Although Grimm could not make decisions on behalf of Lord Cerubo, he could recommend Moss the Prophet and the others to Cerubo. This was the main reason why Moss the Prophet was so eager to meet Grimm. Through the conversation, Grimm found out that Moss the Prophet was not fighting alone. There was a large group of spellcasters with the potential to become sorcerers around him. The weakest of the people Grimm met along the way had the strength of a high-grade apprentice, and most of them had the spellcasting ability of a quasi-sorcerer. Their leader, Moss the Prophet, was a terrifying Grade 2 professional. Unfortunately, the specialty of the Prophet was that he gave up all spellcasting abilities in exchange for a more powerful foresight ability. Therefore, although he was of a high grade, he did not have much offensive power. Instead, he often needed the protection of his followers. For Prophet Moss to be able to gather such a large group of people around him and hide in the heart of the Kingdom of Nights, it was evident how powerful he was. Thus, Moss the Prophet and his followers were more like a mutually beneficial group. Moss the Prophet relied on his followers to protect him, and he could provide them with protection to avoid danger, allowing them to escape from the pursuit of the terrifying demon hunter knights. Such a small group of people could only appear in the cruel and abnormal environment of the Plane of Nights. But no matter what they were thinking, Grimm's mission in Skander City was much easier now that he had the support of the local tyrants. In less than half a day, the information about the demonic foundry camp and the whereabouts of the king were delivered to Grimm. Grimm had 2 missions to carry out in Skander City. The first was a kill order personally issued by Lord Cerubo, requesting Grimm to kill Edward VII as soon as possible in order to cause internal strife in the Kingdom of Nights. The second was Grimm's personal mission. The rune energy fusion knowledge that he needed was hidden in the demonic foundry camp, and he was determined to obtain this knowledge. The demonic forging camp was actually the largest and most secretive military equipment manufacturing facility in the Kingdom of Nights. The standard rune equipment required by the Demon Hunter Knights were forged in the Demon Forging Camp. For a long time, the Demonic Forging Camp was also a special occasion where the nobles of all sizes were eager to infiltrate. Everyone in the world knew how powerful a Demon Hunter Knight was. One was the invincibility of the Demon Colts, and the other was the powerful defense and attack power brought by the runic equipment. Therefore, any ambitious aristocrat would want to steal all the mysteries of the kingdom's rune equipment and then secretly cultivate their own rune warriors. Unfortunately, this so-called demonic forging camp was one of the most important secret places in the kingdom. Almost no one had successfully barged in and escaped alive. If it wasn't for the information provided by Prophet Mars, Grimm wouldn't have been able to find the location of the demonic foundry camp by the time the Kingdom of Nights was destroyed. Late at night, inside a simple and shabby wooden hut, Grimm sat alone at the only wooden table in the room, reading the documents in his hands in the dim candlelight. He had made the request during the day, and the other party had sent someone to deliver the information at night. The information was very detailed. Other than the exact location of the demonic foundry camp, it also included the layout of the buildings and the division of functional areas, as well as the number of guards and their strength at each pass. It had to be said that the person in charge of building the demonic foundry camp was very smart. For the sake of secrecy, they had hidden the demonic foundry camp in the Mingsu Mountain. In other words, the demonic foundry camp was not stationed in a relatively open plain, but hidden in the belly of the Mingsu Mountain. There were only 2 roads leading there. One was the headquarters of the Demon Hunter Knights on a mountainside, and the other was the back of the mountain. The former was the main passage, mainly responsible for transporting materials and resources. It was guarded by 3 to 5 Radiant Knights all year round. It was almost impossible for outsiders to barge in. The latter was a small hole opened in the middle of the cliff, responsible for dumping the waste produced from the forging of the rune equipment. The hole was more than 300 meters from the bottom of the cliff, and the cliff was rugged and steep, making it almost impossible to climb up. Moreover, the hole was equipped with a sturdy metal fence, which would only be opened temporarily when the waste was dumped. There were also guards patrolling there, and ordinary people would not be able to sneak in. After carefully reading all the information, Grimm quickly drew a three-dimensional model of the demonic foundry camp in his mind with the help of the AI chip. As the data of the coolies, craftsmen, and guards filled in, a lively and realistic demonic foundry camp was formed. With the first-hand information of the demonic foundry camp, the next step was to consider how to barge in and sneak into the drawing room at the core of the foundry area. The sheepskin scrolls containing all the knowledge and designs of the rune equipment were stored there. As for the equipment there, it was enough to make Grimm click his tongue. Under normal circumstances, there were 5 Radiant Knights stationed there all year round. 3 were in charge of protecting the Knight headquarters, while the other 2 were stationed in the demonic foundry camp, separated by a wall from the drawing room. However, with the frequent attacks of the giant dragons on the capital, many Radiant Knights have been deployed to protect the safety of the palace. As a result, the number of Radiant Knights stationed in the demonic foundry camp fell to its lowest point, with only 2. One was stationed at the Knight headquarters, which was near the entrance of the demonic foundry camp, while the other was stationed inside. This was undoubtedly great news for Grimm. Unfortunately, even so, a Radiant Knight with full battle prowess was an insurmountable mountain. Unless he could sneak into the drawing room without making a sound, as long as he was discovered by the guards, he would inevitably alert the Radiant Knight stationed there. In the Greenland forest, Grimm might have been able to toy with the Radiant Knight by relying on the complex terrain and powerful mobility of spells. However, in this narrow underground passageway, he had lost his mobility. The moment he met the Radiant Knight would be the moment he sacrificed himself for the cause of Magi. Even though he had personally killed a Radiant Knight before, it was only because the Radiant Knight was exhausted. Grimm had been accumulating strength and waiting for the Radiant Knight to be exhausted. He had even sacrificed the Lightning Giant and a group of other magic puppets to achieve this result. However, he was now facing a Radiant Knight with full battle prowess, and in the enemy's territory. The AI chip simulated hundreds of intrusions in the spiritual space, but it was a pity that the Radiant Knight would always make an appearance. In the end, the AI chip came to a conclusion. If it did not think of a way to get rid of the Radiant Knight stationed there, Grimm's plans to snatch the drawing room would be for naught. Apart from this problem that troubled him greatly, the mission of assassinating Edward VII that Lord Cerubo had personally assigned was also fraught with difficulties. Edward VII was hidden in the palace at the peak of Mingsu Mountain, protected by a large group of Radiant Knights and Spellbreaker Knights. It was also the only area where the dragons did not invade, so the defenses of the buildings were rather complete. In order to prevent a sudden attack from the dragons, the guards there could be said to be impenetrable. The chances of Grimm breaking in and killing the king were slim. The more he understood about the information on the sheepskin scroll, the more powerless he felt. While the strength of a rank 1 Magus was enough for him to live a carefree and happy life in the Magus world, in the planar battlefield, every step he took was filled with danger, as if he was treading on thin ice. The slightest misstep would result in the destruction of both body and soul. Just as Grimm was feeling vexed and hesitating, light footsteps sounded outside the wooden hut, followed by a light knock on the door. Prophet Moss had personally come to pay a visit. I believe you have seen the information, sir. May I know how confident you are in completing these 2 missions? Prophet Moss could not help but ask as soon as he sat down. Grimm was honest and spoke bluntly. If I were to rely on myself, I would not be able to complete either of these 2 missions. Then are you planning to give up, sir? No, not at all. Grimm smiled. If I were to rely on myself, of course it would not be possible. However, with Lord Moss' help, things will be different. Grimm could clearly see that the information provided by the prophet was so detailed that it was hard to believe. It could not have been obtained by those half-baked spellcasters. The only possibility was that the prophet in front of him had obtained it through prophecy spells. Since the prophet had such a powerful ability, he might be able to rely on his terrifying prophecy abilities to find loopholes that others would not be able to detect. Wasn't this his forte? However, it would be impossible to borrow his abilities without paying a price. After all, the information provided by the prophet was more than enough to compensate Grimm for introducing them to the great Magus Salubo. Thus, to obtain the full support of Prophet Moss, Grimm had to come up with something new. That night, the two hid in the wooden hut and discussed for the entire night. From his second day onwards, Grimm did not take a single step out of the hut. He stayed in the hut and frantically copied the sheepskin scrolls day and night. In just 3 days, he had completely copied out some of the more basic magic books of the Magus world without missing a single word. It included the daily meditation techniques of acolytes, spiritual force training methods, branches of the magic system, and some basic acolyte spell models. With such a complete magic system as a reference, as long as Prophet Moss could survive the calamity of the plane's collapse, he would have the possibility of continuously nurturing spellcasters of this plane. However, this was something that the great Magus Salubo could not provide him with. Of course, in order to prevent the other party from turning hostile, Grimm had used spells to seal most of the contents when he was copying the scrolls. If he did not personally undo the seals, all the sheepskin scrolls would have been burnt to ashes in a raging fire. Chapter 240. Under the night sky, Scandra City had lost the hustle and bustle it once had when it was the capital. Other than the scattered lights in the upper city and near the palace, the rest of the city had sunk into darkness. After nightfall, it began to drizzle in the city again. Hence, there were even fewer people on the rundown streets. The displaced residents huddled in their crumbling houses, relying on the half of the roof that had yet to collapse. This was the 11th day since Scandra City was attacked by the dragons. In the beginning, the dragons only targeted the wealthy merchants and dignitaries in the upper city. They rarely harassed the lower city and the civilian areas. However, after the dragons finished looting the high-value targets, they finally set their sights on the civilians who made up 60% of the city's population. On the first few days of the plundering, the ones that flew over were all adult dragons. With their powerful individual strength, they completely crushed the guards of the trading companies and the guards of the nobles, smashing through the warehouses and cellars that were filled with resources and treasures one after another. Although Scandra City had the strongest ground forces in the Night Continent, the weak King Edward VII ordered all the high-ranking knights to be stationed near the palace, forbidding them from clashing with the dragons. Hence, without the protection of the kingdom's military force, Scandra City became the dragons' hunting ground. Every day, dragons flew thousands of miles to loot the city. As the dragons needed to attack more and more cities, the number of adult dragons in the Dragon Valley was not enough. Even some young dragons who were close to adulthood were sent out. They followed behind the adult dragons to practice their basic hunting skills and sharpen their claws. Under such cruel torture, Scandra City was like a terminally ill patient. Every day, it struggled on the edge of life and death, quietly waiting for its last breath. Grimm was wrapped in a thick black traveler's cloak, like a midnight spirit walking in the dark. He followed behind Leaf and Razor, quietly shuttling through the dark alleys of the lower city. Leaf was the skinny young man, no, the young girl, who brought in a prophet mass last time. Due to severe malnutrition when she was a child, the 14-year-old girl, Leaves, was skinny. It was almost impossible to tell her gender from her appearance. After she was found by Prophet Moss, her awakened talent was somewhat similar to the mind control of curse wizards. Due to the lack of systematic training and reasonable use of resources, Leaves could not find a spellcaster who could guide her after her talent awakened. As a result, other than a few innate spells, she had almost no other spells to learn. Therefore, after carefully observing her body, Grimm could not help but shake his head and sigh. This little girl, who was born with a talent for spellcasting, only had the strong spiritual power of a quasi-magus, but her basic attributes were not even as good as some ordinary people. As for the other 13-year-old boy, Razor, he was basically the same as her. The blade had an extremely special metal affinity, allowing it to naturally control some metal weapons. He also had the strength of a quasi-sorcerer, but he had mastered almost 0 spells, and his physical fitness was a mess. As street beggars who were once worse than pigs and dogs, they had no relatives and no official names. Even the name they were given now was something Prophet Moss gave them on the spot after he took them in. However, although they were weak, their familiarity and understanding of Scandra City was unmatched by outsiders. What Grimm needed were local tyrants like them. They passed through countless alleys in the dark, and even climbed over 2 or 3 abandoned houses along the way. Soon, a 3-story watchtower appeared in front of them. If they wanted to sneak into the upper city from the lower city, they had to pass through these watchtowers. Looking into the distance, there was a small, arched doorway. Under the dim light of a torch, 3 city guards were gathered together, holding their guns and chatting. While Leaves was dealing with the guards, Razorblade once again approached Grimm. "Hey, big guy, is your world really that powerful? I heard from the old man that you wizards are powerful enough to dominate the multiverse." 2 balls of flame burned quietly under the shadow of Grimm's hood. He did not feel too repulsed by this overly curious little girl. As their ages were not too far apart, he felt an inexplicable sense of closeness. Many times, he could not help but sigh. Fortunately, he had transmigrated to the Magus world, where magi were respected. If he had been unfortunate enough to fall into a terrifying place like the Night Plane, even with the help of the AI chip, he would not have been able to make a name for himself so quickly. Magi are not as powerful as you think they are. In the multiverse, there are countless powerful races and planes that are more powerful than magi. You should be glad that it's only us magi this time. If it's the Lords of Calamity from the Disaster World, your entire realm won't even be enough for them to swallow. Since there was still plenty of time, Grimm chatted with him from time to time. Only when Leaf waved at them did the 2 quickly walk into the doorway, illuminated by the torch. The 3 city guards wore old leather armor and held long spears in their hands. They leaned against the wall in a frivolous manner, still chatting idly. Their eyes were wide open, but there was no spirit in them. They did not react to Grimm and the others' approach. Grimm could see clearly that each of them had a strange rune flashing on their foreheads. The 3 of them passed through the doorway, silently. After disappearing into the darkness in the distance, Leaf removed the rune in her hand. Only then did the 3 city guards awaken from their stupor, as if they had just woken up from a dream. However, the short pause didn't affect the 3's interest in chatting. They continued the topic and were still chatting happily. "That's a pretty good ability." Grimm praised her, which was rare. Of course, the fact that this little girl could figure out such a strange way to use her innate talent without anyone's guidance showed that she was also a talented person. It was a pity that she had been born in this unfortunate Night Plane. If she had been lucky enough to be born in the Magus world, she might have become a powerful Magus. Of course, Blade seemed to have a special liking for Leaf, and he immediately said excitedly, "Sister Leaf is an important person in our party. Other than the old man and the few mentors, she's the strongest." "Blade, shut up." Leaf, who was walking in front, turned around and scolded in a low voice, "If you don't watch your mouth, I'll make sure you can't speak for the whole night." With her special ability to control thoughts, a simple psychological suggestion could temporarily make people lose their ability to speak. After all, the people in this world did not have a simple and practical witchcraft accessory like the spirit brooch that could protect the mind and mind. Hearing her leader's anger, the young Blade stuck out her tongue at Grimm and quickly shut her mouth. "Mentor?" Grimm smiled faintly, silently savoring the taste. Leaf was already a quasi-sorcerer who could control thoughts, so the mentor that Blade mentioned could only be an official sorcerer. To be able to successfully become an official spellcaster under the cruel suppression of the Demon Hunter Knights, these guys must have extraordinary talents. After passing through the doorway, they had entered the so-called uptown. Compared to the low-rise bungalows and dilapidated wooden houses in the lower town, the entire uptown was filled with beautiful villas with gardens and lawns. Their target's villa was even closer to the Palace District, so one could imagine how difficult it would be to sneak in. Grimm's terrifying witchcraft could indeed turn the place into a sea of fire with just a wave of his hand, but it was difficult for him to sneak into the heart of the enemy's territory without a sound. His flame leap was indeed a good mobility spell, but it was hard to hide the sudden burst of flames and the sudden explosion of the flame ring. If he did not want to attract the attention of the entire uptown guards, he had to rely on the abilities of these small local bullies. The three of them walked and stopped from time to time, occasionally sneaking into the dark to avoid the heavily armed patrolling guards. After more than 10 days of continuous dragon attacks, the upper city had become a scene of devastation. Broken fences and dilapidated walls could be seen everywhere, and collapsed houses could be seen everywhere. Located at the junction of the upper city and the Palace District, this area was the place where the most powerful and prestigious people in Scandrell City lived. At this moment, in a 2-story building of an exquisite villa, faint candlelight shone through the bedroom window. It was evident that the owner of the bedroom had not fallen asleep even in such a gloomy and rainy night. Daphne gently pushed open the wooden window and leaned on the windowsill, quietly looking at the dark night sky. It was only at this moment that the damned dragons would not fly over and disturb her peaceful and happy life. The block above them was attacked by the dragons yesterday. Greena's house was razed to the ground, and a dozen servants were either killed or injured. John's house on the right side of the block was also raided by the dragons, and almost all of the valuables in the house were gone. Every day during the day, the companions would gather and hide in the palace to avoid being harmed by the dragons. At night, they would have the chance to return to their homes to see if their homes were still intact. This kind of stifling days was simply terrible. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.